I think, and now we're starting to edit.
Oh,
Right.
So you've got to do like extreme sanitation, no visitors.
Good afternoon, everybody.
So much you can do, but.
I'm positive Renee and I are started.
Yes.
Hey, we're going to get started. It's 1:05. I want to welcome everybody to our 10th meeting of the Long-Term Services and Support Subcommittee for the, we are a decade old, for our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people in the room. And how many people do we have on webinar, Maria? And 10, 11 people on webinar. So we'll be really careful trying to manage, making sure that people know to raise their hands through the webinar, and we will call on people and all of that. So today is an exciting meeting for me because it's the meeting of my 2 subcommittees. So we have LTSS. This is officially an LTSS meeting. My 2 worlds are colliding. And then the second half of the meeting is the captains from the research subcommittee who are working on the LTSS recommendations and dashboard. Next one. Oh, Kim is crossing the street right now. She will be here in a second.
Hopefully she's watching a lot of stuff.
So we're skipping to meeting logistics. So all of the meeting material, can we confirm that all the meeting materials are posted online?
I am not sure.
Okay. If they are not posted online right now, they will be posted very soon online. We are, as I said, happy to welcome about 9 or 10 people in the room and about 10 or 11 people on the webinar. We will be monitoring closely who is there and whose hand is raised. We will have time at the end for public comments and for a link where you can submit detailed recommendations for the master plan. There is simultaneous captioning available in the room, and as we said, live telephone access with 2-way communication. Welcome, Kim. Just in time.
Yes.
Welcome. You're back.
All righty.
Good afternoon. Thank you to all of you here in the room and Zooming in. We just wanted to take a moment as we got started to acknowledge what's clearly happening in our state and in our nation with the coronavirus and the special impact on all of us as aging people ourselves and leaders in this space. So there's more to say programmatically, but we want to just start practically, of course, that we're all practicing the guidance from our state and local public health departments around basic personal and communal hand washing. And you see our room is set up with all the CDPH recommendations on wipes and sanitizer. And know that all of you know well the hope nobody shook their hand. We will all greet each other with elbow taps and other nods. And we're also looking at meetings and travel, particularly in light of the new guidance from CDPH last night about older adults and others with increased risk. Thank you to the committee for sending that out so everybody had that. So this meeting we went ahead and had and encouraged people again. The good news about the master plan is that we are all Zoom fluent, so we can already pretty quickly pivot to Zoom, which we did here. We will be taking a close look at our 2 meetings next week. We have an equity work group and a research subcommittee, which will be considering whether it's time to go to Zoom only for those 2 meetings, so we'll make that decision very shortly. But we just mainly want to make sure everybody had all the information, encourage you to practice and let's hold each other mutually accountable with kindness to work on all these habits with new commitment. And if you have any input for us about how your own organization is doing it, how your own community is doing it, we're happy to be in dialogue with you about that. The good news is, like I said, the master plan, we, from a very organizational perspective, our next large-scale meetings are the stakeholder advisory committees are until May 16th. So we have a little bit of time where all of our work is going to be subcommittee and work group and webinar, which again is more Zoom friendly. So the work continues, but even more on Zoom probably than we had usually been. Let me take a pause and see if there's any either I know other organizations are wrestling with their own meetings. I just saw that the ASA meeting in Atlanta was canceled. Did I just see that? Yep. So we all have that week free. But it is a loss, for sure, of a time to gather together, so I'll wait to see. But if there's any other, you know, again, the master plan is not just any old meeting, just like ASA isn't just any old, it's a particular community impact. So I just want to create some space to both talk about the operational impacts, but also if there's other thoughts about how we could or should be responding, create some space for that. Yeah, Lydia.
Thanks for that opportunity, Kim, to talk a little about this. I'm not directly involved anymore, as you know, with the State Association for Adult Day Services, but I've been part of some message chains talking about the unique place that our adult day centers have in the community, because we can't lock doors and close people off from the community. People do go home to their own families and their own pillows. So while information from the Department of Public Health has been greatly appreciated and has been circulating widely and deeply in our community, I think any further guidance that we can obtain from the Department of Public Health, from your department, from others around the community-based type programs like ours would be very helpful. So there's been some brainstorming going on among the members of the association already. So besides extreme infection control, which they should be performing anyway, talking about things like visitation, education of the participants and families, posting of notices, and so on. So I think any further advice and information that can come from our state partners would be very, very helpful. And I know some of our centers are in touch with their local departments of public health as well. So just kind of putting that out for
No, it's a great
consideration.
You're absolutely right. So to date, the state has put out residential guidelines, and then last night were some of the individual. And so the third piece of that is community-based guidelines. And so we as a department will be putting out, we have been in touch with providers, whether it's CBAS or, the acronym Adult Day Centers or the Multi-Services Senior Program and Ombuds, to get questions from our providers. And those questions are currently, I just saw the questions being circulated to CDPH, DHCS to get those answers. And so we are going to put out FAQs to the providers today, although in candor, some of the answers may be still pending. I'm not going to promise the answers. But we saw the questions I've seen come through on the CBAS side were about again, screening individuals coming in, what protocols for that, yes, maintaining center standards and, closure center changes, lots of operational issues. So the immediate thing to do is to send those questions to the program staff at CDA. We're logging them, circulating to our partners. I know there's another call today with the Medicaid-funded programs with CMS to get more guidance. We were on a call yesterday, a national call with the feds in all 50 states, learning from Washington, unfortunately, but also about some of these programmatic operational issues. So hopefully you'll see an initial FAQ come out today, but more answers in coming days as we get more clarity from the feds and other states and other programs.
Thank you for that, Kim. And I know this wouldn't be unique to CBAS, who have Medicaid funding, but the impact of potential closures or actual closures on their financial status is going to be also very high,
very top of mind
for everyone.
Yeah, the workers who are there and the centers themselves, their business, it's a cascading ripple of issues. So, yes.
So hi, it's Catherine. On that topic, in some conversations with DVS, it looks like they have the authority under their Title 17 regulations where a group of people can no longer attend a center to continue to pay the provider at the same rate. So I have no idea whether there's similar authority other places, but it seemed like a really forward-looking kind of provision. So individuals that are in residential facilities that can no longer go to the day program because of their specialized health care needs, the provider still is paid for that time.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder. This is Lydia again. And what I was thinking about, Kim, was similar to what we've done with our community-based health home, and during fire emergencies, the staff are still in communication with families, with participants. They're doing surveillance. There are a number of very helpful tasks and activities they can still engage in, even though the person isn't physically at the center for 4 hours. So I'm thinking those are the kind of, ideas and brainstorming that would be helpful to take to your partners.
That's exactly the kind of, when we were on the call, and the call with the feds yesterday, DHCS was on, we were on as well with both AC, this is a really acronym sentence, Administration for Community Living from the Federal Department of Health and Human Services and Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services from the same agency. Those were the kind of questions that were being asked, and the answers that were being given ranged from, you already have that program flexibility. Congregate meals can be taken to go without any waiver, emergency declaration. That's a program flexibility, to, oh, that requires telling us, to, oh, that requires a declaration of a disaster, which hasn't. It was kind of mapping out what was within state discretion, what could be currently federally granted and what wouldn't. So that's exactly what people are looking at, is what would need to be done to kind of ensure services and ensure payment that's critical for continued services. A couple other folks on this. Kathy Kelly, you are unmuted.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to make, just a minute.
Are you okay? We're still with you. Oh, no, she got muted. Did she mute herself, or did we? Yes, she muted herself. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, well,
Sorry.
Karen Keith. Okay.
I had to unmute something else. Can you hear me?
Yes. We still can, Kathy. Yep, go ahead.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I just wanted to make mention, there's a couple of panelists are also, people are on the Zoom meeting also mentioning this, that for those of us who work with families in the home, that we would like to have some guidance or consumer tips for homebound individuals, and particularly, those of us who are working with dementia.
Do you mean, help me out, Kathy, a little bit more. It's like we're dealing with some of these issues in the MSSP program, right? About whether to visit, when to visit, precautions to take, et cetera. But it sounds like you're asking for something a little more different. So could you just continue?
Yeah. Sorry, I need to get away from my computer, I think.
It's always a choice between the telephone audio and the computer audio. Is the one or the other. So tips for family caregivers beyond public health tips, are you talking more about managing fear and managing isolation, or?
Well, we're gonna deal with the coping issues, but I think that a lot of the guidance that have come out, I think it needs to be titrated to the home environment. And we're dealing with families that are not connected with many formal services.
Okay. This is as good a time as any to say that last Thursday, our Office of Emergency Services, Office of Access and Functional Needs, Vance Taylor, held a stakeholder call on the coronavirus, and particularly for people with functional needs. And the decision then was to have that be a weekly call. So this Thursday, it's at 3 o'clock. If you if your organization has not been invited, wants to be invited, send me an email and I'll send you to Vance and get you on that. And that's true for anyone on the call, public or otherwise. It's a stakeholder call meant to help have a two-way conversation request like this. I will think with you, Kathy, offline about where a caregiver, what that would look like, what kind of guidance / TA. And I know AARP is also interested in significant community education and awareness, and so we can also think either here or offline about what the best vehicle for that resource is.
Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Zoom. Thank you, Kathy, for persevering through the audio challenges. Karen Kiesler, can you unmute yourself?
Me.
You did it. Go ahead.
Oh, I did it. I see. I'm doing both phone and computer. So I get an extra star for conquering two technologies, right?
You do.
I emailed Jen Troya, the Deputy Director at CDSS, and Debbie Thompson, also Deputy Director at CDSS last night. San Francisco is our first county and public authority that has put a pause on the provider enrollment orientations that are required before a provider can get their first paycheck.
Yes.
They've currently put a pause on that for 2 weeks and other kinds of training and so forth. So I got a thank you back from CDSS, but I'm interested in connecting with the unions and the other groups to see if we want to figure out some special kinds of accommodations. It's going to be very troubling. Also in Sonoma, we had our first provider that called the public authority yesterday and said that she is self-quarantining herself. So there's real concerns about not having capacity for enough registry providers and emergency backup providers. I don't think that our program, IHSS, has the same authority as DD to be paying providers who are unable to provide care. The limit on 1 day for paid sick leave is not sufficient if we do see a spread of the virus through the IHSS provider community. So really interested in partnering with other organizations to see if we can tackle some of the unique challenges in IHSS.
Thank you, Karen. This is great. I mean, we will, again, we're trying to organize all of us who are doing home and community-based services, and guess this is a good test case of both that bringing together DHCS, CDPH, CDSS, DD, ourselves to get different federal guidance, different payment rules, and get some clear guidance out to folks. So thank you for letting me know you made that connection, and I'll follow up with them as well, trying to get us all on the same communication thread. Let me do Nina in the room, and then Patty, you'll be next.
So actually, since we did come up, the notion of paid leave came up, so this would be a good time as well for the Employment Development Department to really put out information about the paid family leave program and what is available under paid sick leave and under paid family leave under the state program, again, run through EDD. Mm-hmm. And I just had one other question that kind of came up. I'm certainly not an expert in this area, but I know that in China there were reports, and in China folks are actually being quarantined at home, that there was an increase in domestic violence. So just being on the lookout for that in APS and other areas, aside from the isolation issue as well. And I don't know how to advise people to be to look out on it, but just something that I heard that came out of China.
It's definitely been on our radar. People aren't going to day centers or aren't being visited by their IHSS worker for any number of reasons that all the risks of isolation come up. EDD has put out a lot on unemployment, but I don't know if it's, can't remember at the moment if it speaks to paid leave and sick leave and family leave, so I'll take that back as well. But they've been out there promoting that unemployment for lots of folks who are losing work tied to this. Patty, are you able to unmute?
Just done. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have calls for congregational sites because we're planning in terms of whether or not people are going to have to come and meals and take them out and stopping with the actual congregate meals.
You were cutting in and out, but it's about making plans over the next few days and weeks about congregate meals and whether that becomes home delivery and pickup. And yes, that's very much on the mind of our nutrition program. That's the kind of conversations we're having with ACL. So hope to see an FAQ coming out today. Go ahead.
Those will be sent. Will those then be sent within the next couple of days to all the congregate meal providers?
the guidance we will send will go out to the AAAs. It will be really, guidance is a little bit strong. FAQs will go out today with what we know, and we'll continue to update as we get more information. But yes, that communication tends to be between CDA and the AAAs. That's a good point, though. We can circle back to the Meals on Wheels Association, which is brand new, and use them as a distribution as well. That's good.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, more to come on this topic. Christina Beth Hamilton on the phone, then we'll move forward.
Hi, everyone. Just wanted to respond to what Karen raised, Karen Kiesler. I think what's happening and what is going to happen in IHSS is actually quite profound. And I mean, I think for the purpose of the master plan group, and I guess you specifically, Kim, as the director, even though IHSS is not run out of the Department of Aging, I don't know if anyone from CDSS is there, but the problem of backup providers and lack of paid sick leave, to me, is like a house on fire that we're just adding like wood to, so it just is going to keep burning worse. Like, it's a very ripe situation for widespread contamination due to not enough folks who are going to be being backup if backup is necessary, or taking time off if they need to because they are not going to be able to afford to do that. I'm not saying that I have the answers, except obviously, you know, increase wages, but, you know, who knows how we could do that. I want to raise this to the level of the governor's office because this, you know, these are the people at the front lines with no resources to deal with this. And I don't know quite what we do about that, but maybe we can have a targeted discussion about that. I think that would be good.
Yeah. I appreciate the urgency and the incredible seriousness of this. So I think, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of push to get the guidance out yesterday for individuals who are older adults and other people at higher risk. And this really is where we're headed now, is this community-based setting. And so I think this is exactly what I need to go back to my fellow directors and kind of pull us together and see what we can do. I know everyone, I mean, CDSS has been out there out front on their community care licensing, has gotten a lot of guidance out, of course, CDPH, but let's see if we can get some collective and hopefully have an update for sure at the stakeholder call on Thursday, but even sooner given how rapidly everything is changing and how serious the impacts are. Susan.
Thank you.
This is Susan DeMorris with the Alzheimer's Association, and we've talked about it here, but just a reminder that we do have an 800 number that's staffed by master's level clinicians 24/7. So with concerns about people who are homebound, if they have Alzheimer's, dementia, or a cognitive impairment, that's available. And it also works nationwide, so if people have concerns about somebody in another state or if it's a long-distance caregiver, we're happy to make that private resource available.
Thank you. Okay, I guess it goes without saying I'm going to be in and out today doing some of these things. Carrie and Amanda are going to get us to the work of the day. I do just want to again, say how excited I am for the subcommittee about what has been accomplished so far and what got accomplished both on the content side and on the process side, and working with SAC to get the report accepted. Congratulations. To get the action items accepted. Congratulations. I've been telling everybody that was our first set of recommendations, and come back in May for 2, 3, 4 dashboard equity. You really set the bar very high. And so I'm excited for what you're doing today, which is both finishing that work and then going to the data indicators and the measurement and the dashboard. And you have such a great partner in Gretchen Alcom at SCAN to help lead that work with us. And of course, all the cross-pollination research, LTSS, and equity are also modeling. So it's a great agenda. I'm going to be here for as much as I can, but in and out with coronavirus, to be quite clear. Because you all are in great hands.
If I can just make one quick comment. This is Gretchen Alcom with the SCAN Foundation. And Kim, thank you always for your leadership and in the midst of all of this, the anxiety and stress and strain and worry about COVID-19, there's a part of me that is so grateful that we're having the master plan for aging conversation in the middle of this moment, because it just underscores the value of this kind of dialogue at the highest levels in state government, that things happen that are beyond all of our control, but with a state that is planning with the awareness and consciousness of its population aging across all levels of functional need, like this is the right time to be having these conversations. And the threading that has occurred, I don't know what it would have been like a year ago, but what I'm hearing right now from what you're sharing with us is that the flow of information across department with a central focus about the need of aging Americans of all levels of need is central in this dialogue and getting dispersed out into local communities. So really congratulations and bravo for all the connections that you have really helped foster in the last 6 months, and all of the work of everyone in the committees and the stakeholder committees and the, everyone involved in this. Things happen and we respond to them well, and I think this is a process that's showing that it's that the state's responding well to a really difficult situation.
And yes, I want to thank, and the other connection I want to draw on that was the legislature, because we had our first budget hearing on aging just a minute ago. When was that? Thursday morning. And there was a great discussion about the master plan by the legislature, including the need for an information assistance. There was a proposal to do a statewide system there from stakeholders. And then on Monday, we had a MPA community roundtable hosted by Senator Pan. Nina, I'm looking at Nina because she was there, and your colleague Kristen was there. We had great MPA representation. And we did have this discussion both about the master plan and about COVID-19. And again, it was that table had been set, that the framework of the LTSS, I was able to share with the community the 5-part, and if I hadn't, Nina would have. We were ready to share it. So, and then our next budget hearing is tomorrow at the Assembly. So these conversations really are legislature, agency, and stakeholders really all kind of flowing together. So thank you for it is. You always wish you were more ready and more prepared, but I do feel like we're in a better place than we were a year ago. And so thank you.
Can I just make one comment?
Yes.
Let's move on. I said this yesterday at the roundtable too. Just with potential slowdown in the economy and decrease of receipts in our tax revenues, we're hearing about all these conventions being closed, cruise lines not filling up. To kind of thread both conversations, it's still, I would argue, still needs to be a priority. These are cost-saving measures for the state in the long run. I know you don't make, we don't all make the final decisions, but we can't lose this. We cannot lose this opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I have to say.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to hand it back to you.
All right.
Yes.
Sure. So we have our meeting agenda. As I said before, we have the first part of the meeting is the LTSS stakeholder report, final review, a few things to go over before we put the stamp on it. We'll take a break, and then we have our research committee here talking about measures. We're going to be shooting for public comment around 4:30, but we'll kind of play that by ear, whether things go faster. It never really goes faster. It never really goes faster. I want to point out, here we are at meeting 10 to review the stakeholder report and look at the subcommittee work. I also just want to float out there April, May, June meetings. We don't have to make any decisions today for the LTSS subcommittee, but there are also a lot of other pieces of work going on that we need to make sure that the subcommittee is working within those pretty tight timelines. So anybody have any thoughts on April, May, June meetings, with the idea that, so goal 2, 3, and 4, the writing captains who are on SAC are getting their recommendations in by May 2nd. So just with that in mind, what is the best use of the time for the LTSS subcommittee in terms of actually meeting in person, meeting on a webinar, meeting with, you know, cross-pollinating with goal 2, 3, and 4 captains on their meeting schedule. So there's some thoughts and choices to be made there. Anybody, just pause there and see if anybody has any thoughts on that. Oh, Claire, please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me? No?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Just to your question, Carrie, one of the things I think we really should be thoughtful about is that how much work is going to go into having goals 2, 3, and 4 done. And I don't want to lose momentum on LTSS, but I think that idea of how do we support the other groups seems like maybe the primary focus, and also how do we support each other's initiatives that are already going forward this year, so that we maybe can get some immediate actions. That I think we should really focus there in the next couple months so that we don't overwhelm people who are already pretty strapped for time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good point. Ellen.
Hi, this is Ellen Schmeeding. My thought is, just as we shifted some items to the other groups from this group, I'm wondering if there's going to be a shift also back with items that they're processing back to us. So I think we should be standing in readiness to help with those new concepts or ideas or recommendations that come forward.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else on the phone before we move on?
I think our group might need a little hiatus, though. Everyone's worked so hard.
Spring break.
Spring break. So maybe resume around the 1st of April, or no, longer than that. That's going to be here before we know it.
Yeah.
But maybe a month off.
Right.
Because several of us are on other work groups too that are just getting underway.
Many people are either on, or as Ellen mentioned, will get pulled into a goal 2, 3, 4 work group if something that they're working on falls within your expertise. So let's just continue to think about that, and CDA always welcome to feedback on what the next steps are there.
As a non-group member, but a member of the research subcommittee, I'll just acknowledge that that goal 3 discussion happens on March 19th, and goal 4 discussion, this is about measures, happens on April 28th. So something to consider for this committee in terms of the LTSS committee for kind of listening in on that dialogue, and then thinking about how one wants to weigh in from the vision point of a measures consideration.
Absolutely, yeah. Research is continuing on in March and April. So, hurry forth. All right, so we have our AARP guidelines, start and end on time. I don't know how we're doing on that. One person speaks at a time. Be fully present. Disengage from electronic devices. Use respectful language and tone. We always do that. And assume good intentions. So we are going to start with our LTSS stakeholder report. We have Lydia, we have Sarah, we have Susan DeMorris, and Claire Ramsey is on the phone. Do you guys want me to continue with the clicker? Sure. I don't think we have any.
Not really.
Carrie, this is Claire.
Yes, hi, Claire.
Oh, 2 things. One is, am I right that I never heard us all introduce ourselves? Would it be helpful to know everybody who's in the room and on the phone, because I don't actually know who's there?
Yeah, that's a great idea. So why don't we start in the room? I'll start. I'm Carrie Graham. I'm from University of California, and I'm a consultant to CDA.
Amanda Lawrence with CDA.
Ellen Goodwin, CDA.
Sarah Steenhausen, Scan Foundation.
Hi, this is Ellen Schmeeding. I'm here representing the Commission on Aging and St. Paul Senior Services.
Good afternoon, Unawilo Harwell, AARP, California.
Lydia Mitsoulides, Alliance for Leadership in Education.
Jeff Tom, California Council of the Blind.
Good afternoon, Catherine Blakemore, Disability Rights California.
Gretchen Alkema, the SCAN Foundation.
Catherine Keatsman, UCLA Center for Health Policy Research, member of the Research Subcommittee.
And so why don't we do a roll call of people on the phone?
I'll read that out, yeah. So I think we have Adam with CDA, Brandy Wolf, Claire Ramsey, Craig Cornett, Donna Benton, Julia Figueroa-McDonough, Karen Spies, Karen Kiesler, Kathleen Kelly, Patty Berg. Anyone else on the phone? Marty Emoto. Is
there anyone that we missed?
Phone only, yeah, okay.
Christina Beth Hamilton is on the phone. Anybody else? Yeah. Okay. Okay, all right. All right, so who's taking it from here?
I'll start, but then any of my colleagues, please feel free to jump in. We just decided at the last minute because we didn't really think through this. I mean, I don't think that we're going to have, the discussion right now will be more answering questions as you look through the final draft of the report, but also just a little bit of an update on what happened since you last saw the report. So first off, I just want to thank everybody on the committee because everybody played a role in pulling this together and in providing really thoughtful feedback throughout the process, in figuring out how we can bring it together to actually tell a story and to send a strong message about where the system is and where we hope it can be to meet the needs of older adults and people with disabilities. So I think that for me, what's most tremendous about this is the process and the product. But in the process, we were able to really come together as a group, and I think that we have developed a voice together, and that is something that will serve this issue well in not only now, but moving forward. And I think that it's pretty clear to me how committed everybody is to these issues, and I'm hopeful that we can continue this, work together, whether part of this committee or outside of the committee. So thank you for everybody's efforts. But second, about the process, the actual product, the focus of this last round of edits was to take the edits that we got from the Stakeholder Advisory Committee members. We were not changing the content of the recommendation, but a lot of the edits were trying to be clarifying. The writing team of Lydia, Susan, Claire, and myself looked at all the edits. We consulted with a lot of you. We really, we couldn't take everything because, again, if it changed the nature of the recommendation, we knew that was something we had agreed with all of you would not happen. We also thought, in addition to taking the feedback from the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, we wanted to incorporate the person throughout. So we included the pictures of people that we could find with the quotes attached to the picture. So every picture you see is connected to an actual person that is quoted. I still think we could even use more throughout the body of the report. I went through all the public comments that CDA has laboriously compiled, and there weren't many that provided personal perspectives. A lot were really important feedback, but we want the story. So if you have some, and particularly pictures and quotes from people with disabilities, because a lot of these are older adults, which was great, but we also want to make sure we represent the whole community. And we do have permission, just so you all know. We have permission for these pictures and the quotations. Lydia and I talked about not wanting to get in trouble in that way. I think that I'll pause there and see if Lydia, do you want to add in? I just want to say, Lydia pulled this together. She is amazing. She tracked everything on, Claire did an amazing job pulling the grid together, which is enormously helpful. That's the other thing I want to highlight is that we have The Action Ready Grid, this was Claire's brainchild. Lydia worked to hone it a little bit, get some of the feedback. But across the report and the Action Ready items, we hope that these Action Ready items can serve as an advocacy platform for everybody this year, next year, what have you. And so again, I want to underscore the tremendous amount of work that Lydia put into this, and we're really lucky that she's retired right now because she would not have been able to put the amount of time she put into this. And your expertise and your ability to bring many voices together is really incredible. So, so thank you. Lydia, any other comments? And then Claire as well.
No, I just wanted to echo what you've said about the process and how amazing it's been, and it does feel like it's a moment in time. I haven't seen quite anything like this in my 30 years, and Catherine, some of the rest of you have been around that long, and so I'm just really proud to be part of this group and to have contributed a little bit with the editing. Really, the writing part of it was done by all of you. It was just putting all this together in Word, which is fun. I like doing that. And then doing the table of contents, which I still have to teach my friend Sarah how to do. So if you click on the table of contents, it takes you right to that reco, which is fun. Yeah.
This is just like really exciting technology that I need to learn.
We've seen already some email traffic with some comments, so we'll get those going. I was not looking at email this morning, and I also want to thank Sarah and Susan and Claire for the tremendous effort. We were kind of like a tag team. So when somebody was urgently needing to do real work stuff, you know, somebody else could step in. So it was really phenomenal, and I'm just really glad that we got to do this together. We're going to spend a little time today on the grid, and we really want you guys to help us with notes there because we do want to have this be a final kind of public document as well for, as Sarah said, advocacy. So if there are any other what we're calling fatal flaws, do send that to all of us, the writing team, and we'll get those into the final draft, which is due when now, Carrie? Our final.
We want to present the final draft to the equity work group next week, and then also send it back to SAC too. So I think within a week we want to get that. But if people honestly could do a fatal flaw review tonight, tomorrow, and get it back to us within 48 hours, and really fatal. I mean, we're hoping for not, you know, it's the type of thing that we could keep editing for years, really. So if there is, that's what the focus right now is, fatal flaws or grammatical errors, that kind of thing. Any other, we have Patty on the phone. Okay, and then Claire might have some comments.
And then Jeff.
And Jeff.
I have a question. Claire, I love grids and I loved your grids. So, but I didn't see it as part of the plan. I saw it as separate, but I didn't go through that because I just got a copy of the plan. I didn't print it out. So my question was initially going to be, did I miss the action ready items because they weren't, I didn't see them included in the plan. Those were separate in terms of the grid, but where is the grid going to hang? I mean, why isn't it part of the plan?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Patty. We actually were talking about that and trying to figure that out as well. Does it belong in the report? But we see it, the grid is really a living, I mean, the report will be a moment in time. We might want to update things eventually, but the grid will be continually updated. So for that reason, we thought it was an attachment to it, but it wasn't necessarily a piece to it, though, of course, that's open for discussion.
Yeah, I would like to discuss that because I know how things get lost and separated. So, and you know, you're dealing with a legislature that really does not know aging and long-term care. So I just worry about that. It was like,
Yeah, Patty, this is Lydia. That kind of triggered an idea in my mind I'll toss out on the table for everyone, and that might be that while what Sarah describes is absolutely correct, I wonder if it might not be useful to, as an appendix, we could include that one pager that we submitted to the SAC, and then that people could then reference right back into the report.
That's a good idea.
And that's just one page. We're at 48 pages right now.
Yeah,
so.
it's fine. No,
What do you think, Patty?
I think it would be fine. I think that would be great. I just think it needs to belong somewhere that we identified 35
easy to
number
add.
of things that are action ready. They could be in the appendix. That would be great. And that can be updated, you know, because we're doing this for 10, well, I won't be on for 10 years, but we're going to be updating this. So these are the ones that we want to get done like now. So yeah, I think they should be there. And in the appendix is fine.
And
Thank you, Patty. We're going to go to Claire now.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to walk the line between answering people's questions and not trying to jump ahead and not raise my hand. I think it makes sense to put the one pager in. And I was just going to say, just to make sure people knew who weren't able to call in last week on the SAC meeting, the SAC approved separately both the report and adopted the report and that one pager of action ready items. So I do think it's appropriate to put that one pager in the as an appendix. And again, whether or not the grid, maybe Carrie, could the grid be like linked or something? I don't know.
So I'm just imagining, you know, if the grid lived online, there could be a live link to the grid that if you need to, I'm hearing that you might need to update the grid, that it could be updated. I can't speak for CDA of where that would live online, but it seems like it could be somewhere on the Engage website. And then if it gets updated, people still go to the most updated version. Obviously, the link would be if they're reading the online version to link to, or we could just put a tiny URL in the report as well.
Why couldn't then, I think it makes it, why can't the one pager be included in the acronyms, included in book contents, listed out, and then what you refer to is back to the page number that's that particular objective. So they can turn back and they can read the full objective. But I just think it has to be part of the plan. And it be referenced with the page number.
All right, we're going to go to Ellen.
Thank you. I was just thinking the same thing, that one pager is really powerful, and having that either as part of the executive summary or somewhere in the document. The other thing I'm thinking is to not let us off the hook. That one pager or the grid are not the only ideas that can move forward. I mean, all of the rest of them can move forward incrementally, and I'm just worried that somehow that message won't be powerful enough, that they're not the best recommendations, they're just the ones first out the gate. So,
ones, yeah.
Also, all the recommendations that everybody sent in, where will those be displayed? I think that just honoring every single person that stayed up till midnight to write theirs out.
So I'll just say that I'm working with a team of students at UC Berkeley. We are categorizing every recommendation that's coming in, both as goal 1, 2, 3, and 4, as well as being tagged with more topical domains like this addresses homelessness, this addresses LTSS integration, and tagged with populations. Then it will have a link back to the actual recommendation. So that is being worked out. Jeff, you are next.
Yeah, I won't bother to repeat all the laudatory comments, because not that I don't agree with them, but because I don't think they need repeating. But I did want to make sort of a personal observation. As another of my hats, I am a national advocate on the vision loss community with respect to seniors. And there's no question in my mind that the outstanding discussion, the knowledge interchange, and the ultimate product that we've put together is going to make me a more impactful and insightful advocate at the national level. So I want to thank the committee for that.
Thanks, Jeff. Gretchen.
Thank you. Such an amazing body of work in total, and I particularly love the grid and the one pager, and was just kind of thinking about structurally and hearing the conversation about the opportunity for adding an appendix of that one page inside the report, so there's always something memorialized about the action item log. And then I was just kind of playing around with the Health and Human Services page of this committee, the Long-Term Services and Support Subcommittee, and thinking about where there might be an uploaded PDF of the report in total that has the one-pager, that has this grid document with a little bit of a header around it that gives it some context, so it could live as its own free-form document. And I like the date on it, obviously, so because in the event that it is updated. Also, it's a really awesome resource for advocacy organizations who could then download that Excel and then use it for their own tracking, or the California Collaborative or the regional coalitions, many ways, being able to use it as a living Excel document. So I would just encourage that kind of platform, as opposed to, you could easily put it into a PDF, but then it loses, I think, its texture and appeal for groups to really use this as a working advocacy document in their own right. So just adding on to the conversation about how this might live in multiple ways, in addition to Ellen's insightful comment about how do we have a repository of all the recommendations that come in, which your students are so studiously working on, but that can be its own document. And there's, I think, a way to lay out a resources page inside of this navigation that makes it kind of clean about the main report, action items, and then the whole universe that people have offered.
Nina.
Just really quick, I thank you, Ellen, for having said this. Since you did explain, I know a lot of us worked really hard on those back-end recommendations. So the recommendations on the report are just the front piece, the summary. Yeah. So just knowing that we're going to be able to find them online, because I still can't find the LTSS recommendation that Kata did is still, oh, I have it, but it's not online. But just looking forward to seeing when that's populated online, people can see that.
Lydia?
So what you were saying, Gretchen, was also reminding me that we had, as you can see in the grid, we had started to see if we could begin to identify research or other documents that support why that recommendation has meaning beyond being meaningful to people, but has meaning in terms of state budget and policy and so on. So it was also striking me that there might be some, as a living document, some pieces here where the research committee may be interested in helping to populate that column of the grid, thinking about how they might incorporate that into their thinking as they put the research agenda together, and then being cognizant of the other recommendations that aren't the immediate actionable ones. What do we do with those in terms of how that's going to tie in with the thinking of the research committee and then the other goals that come out? So it feels too like, you know, as a start to a living document, this could sort of grow and take on some additional depth at some point. So just a thought to kind of put out there for y'all to think about.
All right, should we move on to outreach to Stakeholder Advisory Committee and Equity Work Group?
So as we said, the next step in terms of calendar-wise, the next step will be meeting with the Equity Work Group. And I think what, again, we're going to be asking for them is we really appreciated their input and feedback that they provided a month or so ago at their first meeting. We want to walk through the report with them and see, you know, again, if there's any glaringly missing components that we should have referenced, or if there's any areas that we might have incorrectly approached in terms of the equity issue, because we tried to really go through and find the areas that we could incorporate those important themes throughout. So, Susan, do you have any other thoughts on the Equity Work Group? Because you were there when we went. I think that was my understanding of how it would work when we go back to them. But again, the goal is not to change the report, you know, content and structure. It's just to get additional feedback. And then with SAC, I guess I would love clarification on the process of getting it through back to SAC, because their next meeting isn't until May, is that correct? So any feedback you have, do we send it via email? Do we have a, I guess we're just open to ideas on how we present them with that. Catherine, did you have?
Two things. One, regarding SAC, my recollection of what they approved was they were going to get the report for a fatal flaw review, and that meant a deadline by which anybody who had a fatal flaw would simply submit that, and then a decision, in essence, would be made how to handle that. But it's been approved by them, and so now it's just fatal flaws. And I sent just a handful of comments earlier today. There were two that I think relate to something we should clean up before we send it to the equity group. So
okay, appreciate that. And just one of the comments, just before I forget, was, you know, terminology. We were trying to be consistent. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Is our terminology older adults and people with disabilities, or is it seniors and people with disabilities?
Oh, yeah, I might have used senior, sorry.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure.
That was just
okay, I didn't know if
quickly.
You were okay with that. Okay.
No, I wasn't trying, I was not
no
from
problem.
That comment. I was addressing.
No, there was another one, right.
Sign language in addition, like we define, it says now spoken languages.
Right.
Sign language is not
right.
spoken, and
no,
we didn't
that's
use
a very
the word
important
spoken
point.
anywhere else. So
appreciate that.
And then the other one was we listed characteristics of diversity in California, and they're not exactly the same as they are in the report. And I think
that's
when
important.
you omit a group, that's
yep.
like, why did they get omitted from those?
Absolutely.
So really just technical kinds
important.
Of cleanup with that. But I did not intend to change any of it.
Oh, no. I didn't take it that way. It's very helpful.
Yeah, that's all I was going to say.
I follow up real quick on that, Carrie. Could everyone also pay attention to the definition section, because that is new, and I want to make sure that we're accurately representing those acronyms and descriptions. So that is new. If people could just take a little extra time on that section and get us your feedback, we'd appreciate it.
So I think what we might do is a fatal flaw review in the next 48 hours from this committee, and then after that, we'll incorporate those edits. Send it out and say, okay, here it is. If everybody's okay with this version, this is what will go out to SAC and to Equity Work Group. Does that work for everybody? So early next week, sending it to SAC.
Okay.
So early next week, meaning Monday the 16th, and then Equity is meeting on the 17th.
Yeah.
You want to wait and see if anything comes out of Equity?
Oh, wait, hold on just one moment. Susan had a good point that if something comes out of Equity that we might want to change before we bring it to SAC. So that's a great point. So bring it to Equity next week with the revisions that you all give. Then after that, we incorporate those edits and then bring it to SAC. So it would be the following week of the 23rd that we would bring it to SAC by email. Okay.
All right, Patty, you are up.
Yes, this is from my perspective, this is a fatal flaw as it relates to acronyms. I think we should be consistent with the definition of long-term services and supports. There's nothing in there about person-centered, and I gave definitions of both of those to Lydia. I think we should be consistent with what we had in our strategic plan, Sarah. I mean, those are understanding the definitions that moved. And then I also don't like the definition of home and community-based services. It doesn't say enough. And again, remember who the readers are going to be. Readers are going to be people who really don't know this field. So I just think we need to be consistent with how we define long-term services and supports, person-centered, and we need to add to home and community-based services, which is like one sentence or something like that. Not enough. And that to me gets back to, I think it was Claire that said, we need to look at acronyms, and those three stood out to me. That's what we're all about.
Absolutely. I think one of the challenges was we had a definition of LTSS at the front that we really tried to condense. And so when you condense, we might have, lost some in translation, but we can revisit again.
mean, I can send them all to you again, but I'm just saying that that's not enough in terms of what you've got in the acronyms as definitions.
Okay, are we ready to move on? Action-ready items and follow-up discussion.
Oh, I could. Yeah, Claire, you can please jump in. I'll just introduce it, Claire, and then this was really something you put your heart and soul into. We took the actionable items that you saw on the one-pager that was submitted to SAC, and then you see the grid that we've already talked about a little bit. So I think since the last time this was published, Claire added the column aligns with governor's priorities, and then we added back in a notes column, which was a little skimpy to begin with. So we'd like to have people take a look at that and give us some feedback, given what we talked about earlier about where the grid might live and its ability to change over time. Claire, I'd like to turn that over to you for discussion.
So I hope people have had a chance to it sounds like a lot of people have had a chance to look at both the action ready items, which is that one pager, which is trying to condense all these many recommendations sort of into one hopefully easy to digest form. As Ellen says, we had all agreed that these were not the quote unquote most important recommendations. They were the recommendations that people identified as being able to take forward steps on either immediately or in the very near future. So because this ended up being, and this was the ultimate decision of LTSS felt this way and SAC agreed and wanted it this way, was not to necessarily have to work toward winnowing down the list, that it was okay to have a pretty long and robust list. And I think there are some positives in that because it means that those things might be, things that could be pulled up by legislators interested in working on aging issues, this term or next. I know this term's basically done on that measure, but, sort of next term budget items. There are a lot that are actually moving forward already, so it gives people a place to say, hey, this issue is important, and here's one other piece of evidence to show that it's in the master plan and it was identified as an action-ready item by the master plan. So we're hoping it can be used in lots of ways. And so that particular list isn't going to keep evolving in terms of content right now, but I think, obviously as somebody said, and I'm sorry that I can't have my computer sound turned off and talk to you guys, so I apologize if you hear my binging email in the background. But as a living set of work we need to do within the report, one of my hopes is that as we progress forward, and sometime next year, the year after, that we can continue to identify things like, okay, well, we got A, B, and C done. Now let's start teeing up D, E, F and keep thinking of staging things in that way. So that's sort of one thing about the one pager. And then the grid, I really am hoping it's helpful, but very functionally helpful for people. It does have a note section, as Lydia mentioned, and my hope is that people will actively add things into that note section. We tried to basically make some basic comments, and if we knew bills were attached or budget items were attached to those immediate action items, we were trying to identify them. It's possible we didn't catch them all. It may be that there's other activity happening around a particular issue that we're just not weren't aware of. So those are the kind of things we're really hoping that you guys will start to populate the notes section with. I don't think there's any need for the notes section to become 75 paragraphs per item, but the idea of like, hey, this has got this bill number, it's also a budget item, and I've also got interest from the governor around these issues or something. Those are good kinds of notes to put in, and so we can definitely talk about those things today a bit, but if people also, we can put that up in a way that people can either email us and say, please add this to the notes, or if people want to add it into the grid themselves and then send it back with edits, we can try to keep a master copy. And at some point we could put it up on Google Sheets or something so that it's more universally editable. I just want to make sure it doesn't become a total mess, and that people are still able to use it and it's still helpful. So I will stop talking now. And what kind of questions do people have, or thoughts or comments or additions that they want to talk about now?
Ellen?
Claire, I would just like to ask the question. I think I really love the grid, and there's so much meaningful and helpful information. How was the decision made as to whether it was a budget item, legislative, infrastructure? Could you say a little bit more about that process?
Sure, and I think I'm laughing only because I believe good thinking went into it, but also quick thinking went into it, because it was one of those things that was done in a lot of haste over a weekend. We tried to basically identify a lot of things in theory have some sort of budget ask associated with them. You can do almost nothing for actually totally free. But we tried not to overdo that. So if like the recommendation was about, something infrastructure related to like, reorganize this department, there may be budget associated with it at sort of some level, but that didn't seem like a budget item to us. However, we tried to be thoughtful. So a lot of the things that are legislative asks are going to necessarily have budget asks associated. So we tried to click both when that was appropriate. I think it's another place for everyone to look, especially on the recommendations that they either submitted themselves or are in their own wheelhouse. And we're totally open if like we misidentified something or we didn't click enough boxes, please let us know. We were thinking in terms of administrative, that included both regulations potentially, but also could be other action items by an administrative agency. So for example, like Department of Labor is looking at putting together a task force. That could be administrative as well. And yeah, legislative and budget are a little more clear. And then infrastructure, I think, was in some ways the hardest. We were trying to capture ones that felt little sort of not well captured by the other three. But again, there's no ego or hurt feelings if people are like, oh, you said it was this, but it's actually that. So I just would say everyone look and see if those are the right categories and they're all captured properly. And the last thing I'll just mention is almost everything that's a legislative or budget item will need administrative action to implement, but we didn't click every single item to have an administrative action immediately, because that just didn't seem like accurate for what the initial action that had to happen was. So we're really trying to look at like sort of what's the first or second things that have to, or the simultaneous things that have to happen to make this work, as opposed to clicking everything that could ever have to happen related to that item.
Okay, next is Catherine.
Oh, sorry, that was from before. You may skip over me.
Karen Kiesler is on the phone.
And Jeff.
Hi, this is Karen. Question of Claire and others. Some of the things that are on the action ready list don't have budget requests or legislation moving. So for example, in the homelessness, there's the recommendation to reduce barriers, and it relates to the governor's agenda, but there were specific recommendations, likewise on emergency backup, getting the state to pay for criminal background checks for IHSS providers and others. So is there a recommendation on how to frame in notes the way that the people who were behind the proposal, the origin of the proposal, how they had conceived their proposal as being action ready? So for example, if we have a proposal and there's not a budget ask or a piece of legislation, was the framers thinking that there should be some kind of broad language to say, set up a task force or do something to meet this goal by a certain date?
I don't think it was sort of that rigorous. I mean, part of the thing that I would say this list is very much a consensus document in that, or maybe that's the wrong word, but I mean, very much, and like, what did people want to see added that they believed was immediate action item ready? That, you know, we did try to put some parameters around, but I think there was a real sense, it's like, you know, there was nobody being a gatekeeper, right? It wasn't for any of us to say, okay, this action item, this item is action ready and this one's not, we're playing gatekeeper on that. I know some things are in different postures than others, and some things might literally be like, if the legislature and the governor said yes, then they're going to happen. And other items might feel still a little amorphous, even though they're on the immediate action item list. I think that was just the nature of how quickly and how broad the sort of idea gathering was. So I think it's possible, like, for example, on that homelessness one, there's been some work going on in terms of getting that one was around administrative work by the department. There's been some administrative work that the department just put out guidance around for counties around homelessness and own home definitional stuff. And I know personally there's some hope that we can build on some of that work to do some additional sort of administrative thinking with CDSS around these issues, versus not that there's a bill at this second, although I'd love there to be something next year. So I think that's, you know, I think different people did have different thoughts. We can certainly put our ideas in, but I do want to say that I don't think just because something doesn't appear does not mean it's not potentially action ready, or that it's sort of, this list is sort of the end all be all of everything important, because it's not. I think it's a starting place. Sarah?
I think it's a really great list. I'm wondering if we can put out a request to our committee for something, for example, like reading services. I mean, some of these things, if there were funding and if there were statutory authorization, would not be difficult to implement. The impediment has typically been funding, and that's why I'm wondering if we can sort of strengthen some of these things where there's not yet a specific budget ask or piece of legislation, to be recommending that it be considered for the May revise or something like that.
Well, I think that's a great question, Karen. I think that's actually, like, in some ways, like, if we want some of this to be done this year, it's like that's the action that's really going to have to happen, is a group of stakeholders are really going to have to come together, and it might be within this group, it might be with other people external, but I think it's got to be pretty quick turnaround. And that's, again, why I would like us not to have too much other LTSS subcommittee work, because I think that's the kind of work we could sort of turn our attention to, who want to get our stuff passed this year, you know?
Okay, Gretchen.
Thank you. Turn on the mic, Gretchen Alcama with the Skin Foundation. Thank you. Again, I love this grid, and a couple of things, just as a completely fresh reader of this document. I like the descriptions that you offered, Claire, in terms of the categories, and I'm thinking that would be incredibly valuable to have a little glossary in that front matter of this spreadsheet about what you particularly mean relative to admin action versus legislative versus infrastructure. Just will give folks who are not familiar with this document a sense of what those categories mean, however they may come out in the final product, because I hear that there's some consideration about what those buckets mean at this point. The other thing, and I realize this may be very difficult, what I'm about to offer as a consideration is there any way to have a 3 to 5 word statement about each one of these? Because again, as a fresh reader, I have to read the whole text in order to get the essential gist. Now, the challenge of that is reduction to the mean of some kind of title for the recommendations, but if you have it.
We already have titles, so I think what we can do is transport the title from the report and just paste it there.
That would be great. And then just a last suggestion is, and I don't know if this is possible, and maybe it doesn't really matter, but if there is a staging that would be required relative to these actions, such as, something is totally ready and what it really needs is a budget item. As opposed to there needs to be some policy formulation that is incorporated. If there is anything that is about the staging of the action readiness, if that's appropriate, maybe that's in the notes section, but it may be beyond the capacity at this point, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a good point. This is Sarah. I think there are, for the items, for example, I'm reading the email traffic right now about being consistent and ensuring that for each of these action-ready items that have an accompanying bill, we tried to flag each of them. We might have missed some. So please, if we have, let us know. So for example, along the lines of what you were saying, Gretch, those items already have bills that they already have legislative leaders behind. Those are great opportunities. So even though we have a category for legislative and budget, I think there needs to be a way to distinguish which ones are current legislative and budget action items versus you need legislative and budget to get these implemented. So do you see the distinction there? There's which have current ones versus, yeah.
And that could be incorporated in the coding of, maybe that there's an X, but then there's also a C or, something that denotes where things are. And again, not trying to get overly complicated, but if there's something that gives texture to that column that others can then follow, then that helps them in their advocacy too.
I love the idea of color coding.
As long as it works in black and white printing for people.
That sounds good for us to be a little
Okay, next is Jeff.
So let me preface my comment by saying that perhaps this has already happened on an informal basis, and if so, that's great. But even though we have some pretty solid recommendations with respect to needs of the deaf and hard of hearing population, I would hope that this report is somehow vetted through those in that population, because it's really a lens that none of us can completely, see through. So I think that's my point.
Mm-hmm. Nina?
Yes. Nina Harwell, AARP. Just a couple of things on the grid. And I can send you the edits, but under 4.1a, there's actually governor's trailer bill language for paid family leave expansion. Yes, and AB 196 is wage replacement, which we didn't tackle on the report. Not that it's not important, but we didn't tackle it. So I would strike that language out. Yeah.
Yeah, we need that.
Yeah. And I believe FB2 is AB 1993. Christina Voss Hamilton can speak to that. I know she sent around a note about that. And I just have a question, too. I know embedded in our report was a recommendation to make HCBS an entitlement and a right. Where would that fall on the grid? Oh, these are just action ready.
Yeah, I mean, we would love it if that were action ready. Let's do it this year.
Yes, let's.
I would say that's an example of, to Ellen's point, we can't forget these other policy recommendations that will take a little bit of a longer term.
Right.
All right, Lydia.
Lydia Missoulides, I just wanted to sort of summarize what I've been hearing on the grid for the next steps. And I think the ideas that have come forward are really good. So to Gretchen, adding a short title to each one, that would be pretty simple to do, and it would help people spot immediately what the topic is. We do need everyone on the subcommittee to review the grid and get us your comments, because we're not experts in all these areas. And as Nina's already pointed out, a couple of things that were misstated that we need to correct right away. So if you could definitely do that, adding the glossary for what each of these mean.
Lydia, is that in the next 48 hours? Just
Yeah.
like for the report?
Yeah.
Okay, 48 hours.
No worries.
On the grid.
Yeah, Diesel will help me. And then the discussion we've had about the coding and the check marks, it does feel to me like everything should have a mark, as somebody said, and I think our original thinking, Claire, was if it appeared that something could be done with administrative action and didn't require budget or legislative, that column got checked off. As Kim described earlier today, they're having those conversations right now around coronavirus, for example. And then budget would be, definitely would need budget. It doesn't mean that it's in the budget now, but it could appear magically. And the same with legislation. And then infrastructure was to kind of point out some things, I believe, that were needed immediately. And I think there's a couple of recommendations in here. I know there's one that came from me that's one-time only funding, and that would be a really good thing, I think, to highlight too, because we know that the legislature and governor like those kind of things. So if there's anything else on this grid, my fellow subcommittee members, that could be done with one-time only funding, let's pull that out as well and code that. So is there anything else from our immediate conversation I've missed in summarizing, Gretchen?
No, those were the big ones. And I think it depended too on were these categories going to change or shift or be retitled at all, just based on the discussion. I was thinking about, again, new reader, what's the difference between an administrative action and the infrastructure?
Okay.
Because I think about, isn't an infrastructure saying that something that is through an administrative action or maybe not? So just clarity, but that may also just come in the editorial process of folks reviewing the grid, considering are all of these categories needed? Can they be shrunk to a couple more, or to just a few? Is something expanded? So whenever that gets resolved, that there's some kind of glossary about what these mean.
Yeah, fresh eyes is good. Claire, do you have any reflections from the summary here real quick?
No, that sounds really good. And I guess just in terms of people's own workloads, and I know 48 hours isn't a huge amount of time. I mean, I would just say you can look at all of them. You can spend as much time as you like, but if you only have minimal time, please look at the ones that are right in your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
It would be much more helpful to have 20 people fix 2 each than feel like just a couple people are slogging through all of them and not totally sure that they're picking the right things. So, that's super helpful for us, and hopefully we're not wrong on all of them. And also, if you think that sort of the way the infrastructure piece works isn't logical, let me know. I agree that a lot of you could call it some of the infrastructure stuff administrative, but we were trying to sort of separate the idea of those kind of things like, hey, CDA could take up this action and start doing stuff or make regs or change this guidance. They don't need to do a lot of stuff, versus sort of infrastructure sort of thinking more like sort of, I don't want to call it global shifts, but sort of more tectonic shifts happening, and maybe it's like department organization or something that might really take a much higher level of leadership and authorization, maybe all the way up to the governor to actually do. Even if it did affect administrative agencies. So thinking about it like that, see if the way we've checked boxes makes sense to you, if those categories make sense, if there should be a fifth category. We're not locked in. Again, this is to be helpful for all of us. But again, most importantly, look at the ones that you feel most about, and please let us know if we have targets or if there's more notes to put in. That's the other piece.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, super helpful. May I ask one very quick clarifying question? The RECO number, that categorization, so I'm just looking at page 1 and I see 1A and then 2, II.
Mm-hmm.
What does that reference?
Oh, it references the large report, which have 5 big objectives. And so the 1, 2, 3, that numbering references that objective, and then all the sub stuff is, if you go to the report, you'll see the sort of sub recommendation with an explanatory statement about why this is a problem, and then sort of what the recommendations around fixing it are.
great. So I'm just thinking some kind of notation to that effect.
Or the hyperlink.
Or a hyperlink, which would be, I mean, I realize that's at the very end, you'd have to do that, or it could be page number. Something that just lets me as the reader know what that means.
Even just putting the page number in the description at the end of the description, and then we could possibly put in a hyperlink to that online.
Yeah, I think this
we have Catherine and Patty. Catherine, are you?
Again.
Ooh. Great. We have
nice job.
Patty, you are up.
Great minds, Catherine.
Okay, hon. I don't know if they still employ a person in the Department of Aging, but there used to always be like a legislative advocate or legislative coordinator or whatever they called this person, who certainly could, they follow and track a bill as well as every budget item dealing with aging. So, I mean, I think that's who could, you should give this to Kim back and you know, she could do that within 48 hours, or her staff could.
Well, I'm going to make no comment on that. Okay. Let's see. Marty Omoto has a question online typed into the chat box. Can we read? Maria, can you read it?
Yeah, sure. Marty wants to know if anybody, maybe Lydia, could talk to how the grid will be updated, or how it would be updated, given that by the end of May, June budget items bills will undergo change and or be resolved.
Is that the next slide, basically?
Just, you know, it was hard to hear what was said. I don't know if they didn't have a microphone.
The question, Claire, was, is there a way, who's going to be updating the grid as changes happen? I think that's a great question. What I think would be great, and I don't know how you deal with quality control on this, but is it's something that can be updated online by everybody? Is that, I mean, like a Google Doc? I don't know if that's even possible. No.
They get pretty messy.
I'm looking at very scared faces when I suggest.
You could try Google Doc.
I mean, not everyone knows how to use it. And
One person can wipe out the whole thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer is, Marty. Good question. Are you volunteering, Marty?
No,
You're so good at keeping track of things.
This is Claire. I'll volunteer to keep updating the grid for now. I mean, I think at some point it gets, you know, it ends up being a tool for others, and it's sort of beyond our capacity to keep current on. But if people want to send me their edits to it for this first round, and I'll do the updating there, I'm happy to do that.
We have one final comment from Nina, and then we're going to get into our last point of conversation.
So just a question, since I'm the Area 2 writing captain. One of the questions that came from the folks was making sure that we keep a consistent voice in the next round of writing. And if you guys have any suggestions or ideas, if we just kind of mimic the structure and the voice. We don't have to have the conversation now. I can have it offline, but I want to put it out there.
Our last slide for this report is a plan for transmission of stakeholder report and action-ready items to the administration. And so Amanda and I have been just going to tell you what we think we heard. Okay? So 48 hours for any fatal flaws in the report. If anybody needs, what's that? From 5 p.m., Ellen.
That'll be Thursday.
Yeah. So from 5 p.m. tonight, you have 48 hours. And this is also 48 hours to review the grid and make fatal flaw or recommendations on the grid. So this is the LTSS Subcommittee. We're then sending the report, revising the report, and going to equity on Tuesday the 17th. Do we want to get the report to equity a day ahead?
Yes, the goal would be to get it to equity a day ahead. I think that's doable because I don't anticipate, like, really, the fatal flaw stuff I don't think will be too hard.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then incorporating anything from equity, it then goes to SAC on the 23rd. How's that sound?
Wonderful. And then we're going to have a party.
We keep talking about this party, Sarah. We got to start planning.
It's going to happen. We can all party from our home offices, too.
It'll be less than 1,000 people for the.
Okay. Anybody have comments? Nina, do you have a comment on that?
Yes, SAC, then SAC gets it, and that's it, right? I mean, is there going to be another turnaround for comments?
Yeah, that's a question. So SAC will get it on the 23rd, and then we'll give them a few days to send fatal flaw.
Could they send fatal flaws now in the next 48 hours?
The challenge is that we wanted to bring it to equity first because we'll have more changes before it goes back to SAC.
Okay.
So we would bring it to SAC after equity to see the final, very final, and hope that nobody on SAC.
Fatal flaws only.
Fatal flaws, yeah.
Do you want to say that?
I believe SAC was told they had from the 10th to the 17th to provide fatal flaw review. Does that sound familiar?
It could have been, yeah.
I thought that we had asked
But
them.
then what are you going to do when you get changes from equity? I mean, it's just.
Fatal flaw changes?
Well, equity isn't really told like as much. I think it's confusing with equity, who is unhappy that just with the timing, not unhappy might be strong, but they want to look at it through the equity lens and provide advice about, is there anything we missed? Not really just like fatal flaw review. And so it just seems hard to give it to SAC until after equity looked at it, because I think they might add something and then you'll have given it to SAC, but then you're going to have to give it back to SAC again. It just, so that may be what was decided, but I don't know. It just seems hard to pull off.
I agree.
Yes. Okay.
Could we give SAC 48 hours after the equity meeting? And could the expectation with equity be that any changes be made at the meeting? Hopefully with the equity work group, it wouldn't be that they're going to then meet and get back to us, which would mean it's important to get the report to them in advance.
I think then it needs to be like no later than Monday morning, because people really, the expectation that people review this the night before is, I think, challenging and results in people just saying, I got to the meeting, I haven't reviewed it, right? So I mean, I'll be there. I'm happy to be a person that helps take notes online, that makes the changes if that's helpful, but it just seems a little hard to say you're going to get it sometime on Monday, which might be at 9 p.m., and you're going to be prepared by Tuesday to...
Carrie, question to you.
I have seen a draft of this a few times. So just throwing that out there. This is not like they're going to see it for the first time the day before.
Carrie?
Yeah.
If we get it from equity to SAC a little later than we had said that we would at the SAC meeting, is there a problem with that? And then my next question is, how is it going to get transmitted from SAC to the governor?
We will get back to you on that one. Why don't we go back and we'll put together this timeline and discuss with Kim and look at kind of the timeline of the other committees and hopefully finalize something by the end of the week.
That sounds good.
Okay. Ellen.
It talks about completing the report and getting it to the administration. Does it travel through CDA at all in its journey for feedback and reactions to the report and the process that they've been involved in?
My understanding is that this document will be a legacy document from the LTSS Stakeholder Subcommittee. All right, Nina, are you in more comments, or is your flag just up? Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then come back and talk about research. Okay. Yeah.
Yay.
Sorry, I'm trying to pay attention to all these. Yeah, you're gonna just kind of make the big one.
Okay. Oh, today's Michigan. Ooh, that'll be interesting.
I'm such a political junkie.
Read text messages. Yes. I hear St. Mary's has a good seed, even if they lose this evening. Send it. No. No. Open mail.
All right, guys, let's get started on the second half of our meeting. All right, so we are going to pivot into our research subcommittee and the data discussion.
Why don't you each have,
Oh, you're very good. So, just like SAC and other work groups, the research subcommittee has been meeting since October, I think, and we've kind of identified people and put people in work groups within the research subcommittee. And so today we're introducing those on the subcommittee who are working very specifically on Goal 1, long-term services and supports and caregiving. And just to introduce Gretchen Alkema from the SCAM Foundation, Catherine Kietzman from UCLA. Also on the phone is Donna Benton from USC, and Kathleen Kelly from the Family Caregiver Alliance. So they are our core group of research subcommittee members. Not that everybody on the subcommittee is not interested in LTSS, but they've become our go-to. They were voluntold to be the go-to people on LTSS. And just FYI, so we also have a group of folks on our committee who are Goal 2, Livable Communities and Purpose. That's Laura Karstensen from Stanford, Stacy Moore from AARP, Gina Parker Martin from Leading Age, and David Ragland from UC Berkeley. We have our Goal 3 group, which is Zia Aga from West Health, Janet Frank from UCLA, Shereen McSpadden from San Francisco County Department of Aging. And then we have our Goal 4 group, which is focusing on economic security and safety. That meeting is, I should say the Goal 3 meeting is going to be held at West Health in La Jolla on March 19th. And the Goal 4 economic security and safety meeting is going to be held at USC April 28th. And the folks on the research subcommittee who are leading that are Karen Lincoln from USC, Nari Reeve from UC Berkeley, and Ramon Castelblanc from the California Alliance of Retired Americans. Also have other folks on our research subcommittee here who have not yet been nabbed for one of the work groups. All right, so our research subcommittee charge. I should also introduce Terry Shaw from Terry Shaw Consulting. She is on the phone, and she has become, she's a consultant to CDA. She's working very specifically on the data dashboard and the data gap analysis. But just to review, the research subcommittee charge is to achieve and maintain an age-friendly state for all Californians, to create a, the master plan for aging is supposed to be evidence-based and to have measurable indicators. So this subcommittee is looking at recommended dashboard indicators that allow us to understand how older adults and people with disabilities and aging Californians, where are we now? What do we want? Where do we want to be in 10 years? Are we making improvements over time, and are we reducing disparities? There's also a second part of the research subcommittee charge, which is really to develop a research agenda for the master plan. So that's research, evaluation, data collection that should be included in the master plan. Here are our research subcommittee meeting timelines. So as I said before, and you guys were right, the Goal 3 meeting is on March 19th. The Goal 4 meeting on economic security and safety is on April 28th. We have a May meeting where the research subcommittee is going to be reporting to SAC on preliminary recommendations similar to what the LTSS researchers are doing here today. And we will be reviewing SAC feedback and reviewing the dashboard in May. All right, so I want to start off, Gretchen. Do you want to do the?
No,
you just tell me.
Yeah, that sounds great. Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. Gretchen Alkema, Vice President of Policy and Communications with the SCAN Foundation. I'm deeply honored to be on the research subcommittee for the Master Plan for Aging process, and I'm grateful to be joined by my Goal 1 colleagues, Catherine, Kathy, and Donna. And Catherine is here with me in person, and our other two on the phone. So we're going to pass the baton across our team today. And but my job really is to just give you an overview of what have we been up to at the Research Subcommittee, how have we thought about this process. We've obviously received a lot of questions from folks about how we're thinking about measures in different ways. And we needed to kind of take some reflection time ourselves of what is the intent that was laid out in the executive order, and then pushing beyond that, what is the spirit of what our guidance is of that will serve both the master plan process now well as the measurement of progress over time at year 1, year 3, year 7, over the 10-year window. How do we think about what that measured movement is in ways that gets us to addressing the goals of the master plan as well as the intricacies of however the recommendations may ever come out ultimately at the final master plan that's delivered in October. Because we're certainly mindful that our committee, such as your committee, such as the SAC, are deeply rooted advisory committees to ultimately the cabinet level work group. So our goal was to give as much clarity and direction in how we thought about this process, as well as a sample set of measures themselves. So we're delivering this to you all. This is a measure kind of frame set that is for all of the goals, not simply goal 1. So I wanted to just kind of lay the groundwork there. I'm going to lay out some considerations, and I'm just happy to take some real-time questions before we actually go into some of the recommended measures that we have that fit underneath the goal 1 banner. So before I start, any clarifying questions in the room or on the phone? All right, we're just going to jump on in. So let's go. Goal 1, so particularly for the conversation today, we are very focused on Goal 1, which this group knows very well, so I don't need to articulate any of the details on that other than we think about measures related to both objectives that are in this goal. So Goal 1, Objective 1, Goal 1, Objective 2. So thinking about the LTSS side that connects with the person as well as on the family caregiver. And moving forward, we thank you for the opportunity to take a peek at what all of the great work that you've been doing through the process so that we could be mindful of the critical objectives that are part of the stakeholder report that we just reviewed earlier in this process. And so moving further on to the next slide, the research committee being kind of who we are, people who sit inside of the research world, we thought very deliberately about what is the methodology about bringing forward ideas of measures for consideration. We were mindful about the number of recommendations that were coming out of this group, which is incredibly valuable. We're also mindful that those are going to be served up to the cabinet level work group for consideration, and they'll move forward how they see fit on that work. But we really thought about our charge is about measuring at the goal and objective level for the master plan, as opposed to measuring at any particular recommendation at this point. And, there may be different perspectives on that, but we felt like that was the most prudent charge to move forward in terms of what we're seeking to deliver to the cabinet level work group. And that also gets to the spirit about where are we measuring at when we're putting forth these measures. So I'm going to go to the last bullet first, and then I'll move back to the middle. One of the things that has been kind of a consideration about measurement in this larger realm, and something that we've used at the SCAN Foundation is to think about the differential between what is a person-centered measure. So how does somebody's life actually improve in various ways, as opposed to system drivers that we know are key contributors to moving the measure for the person. So a person level core measure might be something, and I'll just use something very benign, does my well-being improve, however I rank my well-being over time. But it's talking about me, my particular reflection, and then we would take everybody's sense of well-being throughout this meeting, and then we put that as an average, and that would be the well-being measure of, say, this group of people in this room, as opposed to was there coffee? Were there snacks? What's the temperature of the room? Was there good enough light in the room? All of the kinds of measures that are about the system environment. How well does Zoom work? Those kinds of mechanics of the system frame that allow for, how people perceive their sense of well-being. And so we thought a lot about that particular distinction and being very clear about that, both in terms of objective one, about people getting their LTSS needs met, as well as the experience of the family caregiver. And then that kind of moves us to the place of saying, within the spirit of person-level core measures is how we define it, versus system driver measures, those things that kind of facilitate the environment. What are those measures that exist today or will very soon be available? And Catherine's going to talk through some things, particularly in the California Health Interview Survey, or CHIS. So if we punt to CHIS, please know that that's what we are talking about. We'll try to be acronym-free as much as we can in this discussion. But there are things that are available now through that interview survey, or things that will very soon be available to report out on. We did not, in this conversation, we did not include any measure that is in what we call the land of dream, that we wish we had that measure, and then put it in the dashboard. This is for dashboard 1.0, is about what exists today, and that's really, really, really important. So contextualized about, we're measuring at the goal and objective level for the master plan. We're looking at person-reported, kind of person level and system driver measures that actually exist or will soon exist. Another example is one of the things we talk a lot about is the scorecard that AARP National does with support from the SCAN Foundation and the Commonwealth Fund. There will be a 2020 scorecard on June 25th, so incorporating the measures, say, from that frame. And so that just gives a little feedback on that. I do want to move to the next slide to just give you a sense of all the amazingly smart people who have come and provided context to the research subcommittee about various ways to think about existing. Yes, Lydia, champion extraordinaire. That was quite a day getting you there. So glad you could join. But we've had a lot of incredible input from really, really thoughtful folks from all sorts of different kinds of perspectives about measures that exist today, and frankly, that have touch points across all of the goals. And so we're just going to bring forth the ideas to this committee today about the ideas for measurement for goal one. But just know that, one of the really wonderful things that Gary and Terry and Kim and team have helped kind of organize for the research subcommittee is bringing in thoughtful people who have thoughtful perspectives on how do you measure at this larger level and the experience of people, but also the system drivers and the interaction between the two, because those are really, these are huge methodological challenges. It's been a really awesome experience, and I've learned a ton through this process. What I've also, I will share is we have an incredible partner with both the Department of Public Health as well as OSHPD, the statewide planning and development, and they've been really incredibly valuable bringing forth their information as well as their conceptual frame through this process. So I'm very lucky to have great state partners. In addition, we continue to have this parking lot of what are the things that we would love to measure and what would be really valuable to have over a 10-year window, and how do we think about what the construction of that would be. And those are ideas that we will share some of that today, but that will be part of the larger report that the research subcommittee will put forward. So know that we're not just focusing on what we have, we are seeking a vision towards what additionally we could measure over time. And I think some of that will be really valuable, both in terms of the feedback from this group and the continuing process as we put forth ideas for measurement, but also where the cabinet level work group goes with kind of how the master plan report comes out in play, and we can see how would we figure out how we would measure those recommendations and indicators moving forward. So just know that that is very top of mind for us. So going to this next slide, so what our job is, very particularly, is propose a very small set of existing measures for a dashboard 1.0. You can see how I'm setting an expectation with all of you that this is a very small set. But the spirit is that you begin measurement with what you have in a way that is clear and definable, knowing that we can always grow. But what we have right now, frankly, is a really small set of measurable indicators that get at person level and system drivers. And note that what Catherine is going to share, and both Catherine and Kathy are going to share, are a proposed set of measures that we've mapped up against the 5 objectives that are in your report. So we wanted to make that synergy based on all the tremendous work that you have done so that you can see how those pieces come together from our frame set. You may disagree and switch that around, which is okay. We're really open to lots of feedback, but we felt it was really important to take into consideration how you all thought about the objectives and the recos going forward. So as we go to the next slide, we've really thought about a broad range of data sources, even though you're going to see primarily a couple in this presentation today. But again, consistently aligned with the Master Plan for Aging goals, and being, really thoughtful about that contribution about population level data versus programmatic level data. Just a lot of intricacies into this process. Please know that for every measure that we put forth, particularly the person-related measures, the ones that are really about people's own experience, our intent is that there is an opportunity to display that information in all sorts of ways that you possibly can. So not just the entire state of California, say, for that measure, but with all of the appropriate kind of equity lenses that we've been talking about through this process. And we'll show some of those, like we've thought about measurement in terms of different ways to think of the construction of age for a particular measure. But if you're wondering, would we do it by racial, ethnic status, sexual orientation, on and on, absolutely, to what's available by eligible within the data. One of the really nice things is we do have a great resource in the California Health Interview Survey that allows us to do a lot of different cuts as well as some geographic cuts. So to the extent that the data allows, we would absolutely push for that kind of visibility from all sorts of population angles. And the spirit of the measure is about that it is directional. So you know that up means something versus down, and that you can see that. So think about directionality matters, as well as that, and in that you can measure change. So it's not just about a measure that is kind of a view of the landscape, but that we would want to see from a person level measure that if you changed the system drivers, even if that they weren't directly measured, you'd see improvement, whatever, maybe improvement means a higher number or a lower number, but you would know very clearly from that measure what improvement in people's lives mean, kind of taking into it the spirit of what the Master Plan for Aging is trying to do. We also took the idea of aging Californians very seriously, meaning that this is not about a particular age 65, that it is about the experience of aging adults in our state, and that there's different ways that we could cut the data in certain circumstances to give profiles of different populations. So trying to be really thoughtful about that as well. So all of this to say, we've thought a lot about the intricacies, and we're more than happy to share more as we look at different actual measures. But it's been really important for us to take kind of a philosophical frame at the very beginning and then apply that as we look at creating a recommended measure set across each of the goals so that there's consistency in the way in which we're putting forth how would the state kind of measure how well we're doing as a state on the master plan for aging and achieving that on behalf of aging Californians. So with that, I'm going to turn it over particularly to Catherine and Kathy, who are going to talk about Objective 1.1 and Objective 1.2, respectively, and then we're going to turn it over to Donna at the end, who's going to provide some summary comments and some recommendations going forward. So, Catherine, take it away.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here and to meet everybody in person, knowing that you've been toiling away feverishly, and it's great to have the opportunity to kind of bring the data piece to your attention and to take inspiration from all of the work that you've done. And happy to be here with the subgroup of our team, Gretchen, Kathy, and Donna, to talk about what we've come up with so far. And Gretchen, you've done a great job of providing that philosophical framework and setting expectations and narrowing them. And so I don't have to say that this is a starter set, and I don't have to say that it's dashboard 1.0, but bottom line, that these are really initial recommendations. We know that they're subject to change, additional stakeholder input, and we would expect that. But I think we do have a starting point and sort of a template in a way that we can work with moving forward with the different goals, with the different objectives, and so forth. On that note, I get to talk about sort of concrete measures, which is always fun. So our first sort of what we are calling person-centered core measures reflects a priority to get a better handle on or understand the scope and the prevalence of Californians who have LTSS difficulties with daily activities. And therefore, we're recommending a measure of reported difficulties with routine care needs, reported difficulties with memory, concentration, and decision-making, and reported difficulties with personal care needs. And of course, the routine care needs correspond pretty generally with instrumental activities of daily living, like cleaning and cooking and getting out to the doctor or to the grocery store. And the personal care needs align with activities of daily living, personal care, bathing and dressing, and so forth. By putting these together as sort of a composite measure, we're able to get a more complex measure of what's going on with folks, what those difficulties are. It's not just somebody, with personal care needs. They may have cognitive memory issues and personal care needs and so forth. So that's why we're recommending a composite difficulty score. Now, these data are from the General Household CHIS survey. So they're actually asked of 40,000 people within 40,000 California households over a 2-year period. And these questions will be asked again they're currently being asked in the current survey, which is 2019-2020, and they'll be asked again in 2023-2024. So I think we're going to have a very robust sample to be able to generate statewide estimates, look at some of those regional differences in terms of the level of difficulties that Californian adults. The survey, to be clear, is for 18 years of age and older. That's how the CHIS defines adults, and that's the adult survey population. Moving along to the next, as important as it is to identify what the difficulties are, it's also vital to understand what are the unmet needs. So we're also recommending a composite unmet needs score, and this is using data from a follow-up survey to the California Health Interview Survey, which is a 15-minute follow-on for people who screen positively, so to speak, from that first set of difficulties questions, and then they're asked to participate in this follow-up, which is currently in the field. A number of you in the room were part of that process. I would like to call that out in developing the questions and the very questions that we're talking about here today. So it's really designed specifically to get information from the consumer perspective, again, going back to those person-level measures, about people's experiences with needs for LTSS, unmet needs, and their actual use of services and supports.
Can I just jump in here really quick? I just wanted to offer a little perspective on why a composite measure. Why build all of this information together into one score? And the spirit of that is you can always disaggregate it. Each of these items, the percent of adults with unmet routine care needs is one measure, and same with unmet personal care needs, same thing with the difficulty. Each one is its own distinct line. So if you ever wanted to see that very particular item, it's always available because it's coming out of CHIS. The spirit of a composite measure is that we see the dashboard, the measurement dashboard, as being a really person-friendly document, that is not about the research universe talking to the research universe. This is really about using data and converting it into information for policymakers, for staff, for news media, for local level planning. So it's truly taking that information and making it accessible. And if we think about the broad universe of folks who are outside of all the experts that are participating on the phone and in person right now, most people kind of just want to have a sense of how many adults have this kind of a need. And they can always go deeper. You can always get back down to those individual levels. But it's taking the spirit of the dashboard. It's really about kind of a temperature check about how well is California doing and Californians doing by building composite measures. I think particularly because we all know in this room, as Catherine shared, that most people don't just have discrete needs, that there's definitely folks who have personal care needs and or routine care needs and or cognitive impairment needs. And so this is about showing a picture about how folks are doing and being able to then set benchmarks about how do we move the needle on that or get the needs addressed underneath all of that. Because people may have needs, but they may have their needs addressed by a whole universe of supports and services that exist in the private domain, in the public domain, et cetera. And so you're starting to see what's the picture that we're kind of calling out about how Californians are. So just wanted to allay any concerns about, is a composite measure too reductionistic? And it's about serving it for our messaging purpose. So Sarah, if you have a quick question.
Oh, wait.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Okay, well said. Thank you. So moving along, the next measure that we're recommending is really looking at the extent to which people with LTS needs report that they are getting their needs met, whether they're completely met, somewhat met, not at all met, et cetera. So it's not just do you have unmet needs, it's if you're getting some sort of assistance, what is the level of that? Does it match what you need? Moving on to the next one, also important to understand the consequences of unmet needs. So we're exploring that by taking together a series of questions that are being asked in the LTSS follow-on survey about different consequences, such as not being able to get out of the house, going without bathing, toileting, et cetera. And just as an example, on the next slide, our very own Dr. Carrie Graham, in her evaluation study of Cal MediConnect, used these measures and was able to generate these rather stark and informative metrics of the consequences of unmet LTSS need. So that's just to give you a sort of a real data example. Thank you, Carrie, for that. Yes.
Just hop in real quick to say that, you hear people talking about unmet personal care needs or unmet routine needs, and it starts just sounding rote. But when you get into these questions, which are asked of people who do have those needs, it starts giving it gives a picture of what it looks like to live with those unmet needs. So these questions are, in the last 2 months, did you need a bath and you couldn't get one because you didn't have help? And 57% of the people with unmet needs who are duals in California acknowledged that was happening in their life. It's also really actionable, right, to have it broken down like this, because you say, okay, well, people have unmet needs. What do we do to address that? Okay, there's this many, 28% of people with unmet needs go without groceries. There's a specific action you can take for that. So it gets down to really actionable data that can be used for program development. That's what I like about these questions.
Yeah, I think they're really powerful questions, and will generate really useful data. In addition to looking at and including person-level data, and the CHIS is, the power of CHIS is in being able to generate this population-level data, which is so important. But going back to the system drivers, we also need to know a little bit more about the services and the programs. Who are they serving? What percentage of the adult population in California are getting IHSS, are getting community-based adult services, and IHS in-home supportive services? I'm trying to de-acronymize for a minute. I'm reminded of that by everybody in the room. At this next slide, again, we would look at to measure system drivers of need and unmet need. We need to know what programs are available, and these are just examples of programs. It's not an exhaustive list here, but they're spanning across personal care programs, adult day health programs, also caregiver support programs, importantly. And we're going to get to that objective 1.2 in just the next moment, actually. Questions here?
Questions? We have Sarah had a question. Yeah.
Just a really quick question about, first of all, this is amazing and really exciting, just the progress you've made in thinking through this. The question is about talking about the scope and prevalence of the Californians with difficulties in routine care needs, et cetera. I think that's a great baseline to have and to measure that consistently, but I would think that it has to be framed in a way that that number on its own isn't used as a negative indicator in measuring the state's progress in the master plan, because having the need isn't the problem, it's the fact that the needs aren't being met is the problem. So initially that was my first thinking, but then I'm assuming that it will be framed in such a way that the emphasis is not on the need, but on the fact that needs are not being met.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the first question she went over, the difficulty, that's really a descriptive question. How many people have difficulty with these? And then the unmet need goes into what you were saying of there's actually not a program that's addressing this need, or a person or a caregiver.
Right. I think your point is really important. It's the way that these data will be presented and framed that's going to make the difference. And it shouldn't be a measure of difficulty year over year. People are going to have difficulties. That's not going to be an assessment of California's progress in meeting them. So absolutely, which is why we are secondarily also recommending the unmet need question, and then the level of adequacy with which the needs are being addressed and the consequences. So it's really putting these together as a profile rather than looking at that as a single data indicator. I would say I think it's still important to be able to say, here is the number of Californians who have difficulties, so that policymakers, et cetera, can understand the level of the prevalence of that.
In taking a step back, I mean, we are in a process that's deeply involving state partners. We're in a state building right now as we're talking about these issues. But it's always good for me to remember that the Master Plan for Aging is for California as a whole, and that there are a lot of private sector players who are involved in this process, and will need to be involved, frankly, in the implementation of moving these recommendations forward and learning from the measurement framework about these particular elements. And so I could think of if there was a Medicare Advantage plan serving the state or a region in California, and their health risk assessment measures didn't comport with the if you say Californians have this percentage of difficulty, and then they look on their health risk assessment measures and they're either way over or way under, that may be something where it's like that plan can say, what's happening here, that we're able to benchmark up against what we know of as Californians as a whole, or we're looking at unmet needs really high. We are as an MA plan haven't measured unmet need. Maybe we need to, because we're seeing high hospitalizations in these particular groups of people.
people, and we haven't asked those deeper level questions about what's the implication of unmet need, but we're seeing folks come in with lots of problems that are associated with those unmet need categories. I mean, it starts to set that profile for many, many players in the marketplace to think about what is their role and contribution to minimizing unmet need, in addition to how do we best use the resources within the state and the various programs in the state for people who are eligible for them to better meet unmet need, or make sure that we have adequate ways of screening people in for eligibility for services to address unmet needs. So it creates that profile that I think sets that baseline. And I agree, it's about what is the way in which you display that, because you could make a number that is the amount of people with unmet need divided by the amount of people that have difficulty. So that gives you this ratio that you're describing, and that's contextualized, and you want to see that ratio change. So there's different ways of putting it together, because you're right, people are going to have difficulty. That's just in the populace, but it's like, what can we do about it, and how do you put that information around? And I'll just acknowledge that during the process of the Long-Term Care Commission in Washington, D.C. back in 2013, there were actually a lot of questions because we didn't have macro data across all segments of the LTSS population to say just how many people actually had difficulty, because federal data does not have enough information about the under 65 population. And so we're very, very grateful in California that we've got a health interview survey that really can crack that nut, so we can see the underlying of difficulty, and then what are the ways in which we can address that as a society, both through public and private means.
We have Patty on the phone. Patty, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I was going to. I am
We can hear you.
unmuted.
Great, we can hear you.
I'm unmuted. Okay, hon. I have two questions. One, wanted to know how you distinguish, just simple definition, how you distinguish between routine care needs and personal care needs. That's one. And the second, when you get into system drivers, there, I'm one of those that it's, that serves a rural area. And so I'm always talking about a basic service mix that needs to be in every county, or at least regionally, for people, because many of the reasons people can't get service is because they don't exist in their community. In rural California, and when we talk about this is a plan for all of California, it means the rural areas as well as the urban rich areas. So first of all, how do you distinguish between routine care and personal care needs?
Great, thank you for those questions. This is Catherine Keithman. So in the survey, we ask about routine. We use the language routine care needs, and it really corresponds with the traditional classification of instrumental activities of daily living. So those are provided as examples as needed to the people who are responding to the survey. So it's really about cleaning and cooking and getting out of the house and getting to the doctor, shopping, et cetera. And the personal care needs are really about hands-on bathing and dressing and toileting, et cetera. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, I know the difference between IADLs and ADLs. I just didn't understand routine versus personal care needs. So thank you for that. Okay,
oh, you're welcome.
But the system driver issue in terms of so many areas that have so, limited services availability, that's going to be huge.
Right. I agree, it's huge, and that's part of the point of looking at systems. So looking at where the disparities happen geographically across the state of California, looking at the difference in what's available in a rural county or a rural pocket of a county versus what's available in an urban area, or even what's available within an urban area in one neighborhood and not across town in the other. So I think that is the intent with getting to this composite measure. Now, getting there is something that we have a lot to talk about, how we're going to harmonize and get data from all these different programs by geography, et cetera. But I think that's the idea, and maybe Gretchen, you can add to this.
Absolutely. I concur with Catherine's comments, and as well as yours, Patty. I think
we felt very strongly that Dashboard 1.0 should effectively survey the landscape in terms of accessibility, in terms of just physically having a program present, availability, a much better word, thank you, about these services and communities so that we can see where do we have it in the state and where do we not have it and where do we have some things and not other things. And again, we're still working through how does this actually come out. Maybe it's a map that shows some kind of hot spotting. You know, we're playing around with the visualization of this, and ultimately it'll be up to our, you know, our great data partners, but we're trying to give as much guidance about how do you represent where services exist in the state and where they don't, particularly to your point that there are many areas that are incredibly underserviced. And that should be informed relative to what that means for the recommendations going forward.
We have Karen Kiesler on the phone. Karen?
Hi, this is Karen. And I really appreciated the comment that you just made about needing to drill into the specific programs to figure out the terms. As I reacted in my brain when you used the term unmet need. And in the IHSS program, social workers are required to document unmet need, and then if there's an across-the-board cut, that unmet need factor can bring down what their potential cut would be. So it has really specific meaning in our program. Now, conversely, the Joint Legislative Audit Committee has just approved an audit request to look at the gap between authorized and paid hours in 4 counties. And it sounds like the theory is that that gap somehow is meaningful in measuring unmet need. And I could talk for a while about why I think that's not a meaningful measure, but it may take some time. I think you're really going to need to dive into each program to figure out how what the meaning is of those terms within the program constraints, and then from there figure out your common denominators.
I think that's a great comment for us to consider on how to intersperse the person level core measure with what's available within the system across these various programs, and recognizing that that the spirit of the person level measures is at the macro California level, even though we can drill down in different ways. And I think it's making me think a lot about language in this, in the display. So I appreciate that, Karen, in terms of the sensitivities of the specificity of what unmet need means within the IHSS program. So we'll take that under advisement.
Okay,
Thank you.
we have, Jeff, you're on the list, but Susan's next.
Thank you both in the room and those on the phone that represent this committee. I've been so curious, and I'm really happy to hear 1.0 and this macro. I think the dashboard will be used by so many more audiences given the direction that you're taking. And I was a little fearful that it was going to be just, you know, an 8-foot catalog and not useful for all the audiences that you just described. So thank you. I really endorse the direction you're taking. At the beginning, when you said the first 2 slides where we used composite, and one we included memory in the in decision making, and then the second one we didn't. And to me, those seem like things, the need and then the unmet need, that they would go hand in hand. And so if you could explain why that was dropped for the second composite score.
Sure. So that's really a function of the way the survey is designed. So the difficulties questions are asked individually, so we can report on them individually, or as a composite. So what combination of these 3 difficulties do you have, right? I mean, we're doing it after the fact. They're asked whether they have difficulties in these 3 areas. and I understand your concern about that follow-up, which is the unmet needs, which is really just looking at personal care and what we are calling routine care needs. It doesn't mean that we cannot cross that with people who have memory, cognitive, and decision-making issues. That will definitely be one of the analyses we do, is to look at those across. So it's looking at now what, as a result of whether people have cognitive difficulties, physical health conditions, functional limitations, as a result of those, what are your unmet personal care needs or routine care needs? Does that help explain? It just doesn't mean we dropped out the ability to look at people who have cognitive difficulties.
Great. So that'll be part of the questioning that helps them determine in the answer if they had an unmet need.
Correct.
Okay. And then I'm curious, on the slide that's on display, you're giving an example of services. Is this the complete list, or are you using, is there a list that exists? We have some in the report. Just curious what the standard is. I'm not saying I know what the standard is for inclusivity.
We are delighted that you have a list in your report, because I think the spirit is wanting to gather as many different ways of thinking about the service framework that is driven or regulated by state action. So that's part of it. And then, and thinking about, right now, we're not even sure how we get all the information to effectively feed the denominator on this. And so, we will take as much guidance on that as humanly possible, but I think particularly we were thinking about, per 1,000 Californians, and we could say, overall, we could say in these different age bands, and we are happy to change the age bands as well. I mean, we're really flexible on this. Kind of, what is the saturation of availability of programs and services that meet LTSS needs, that have either direct funding from state and federal sources and or are directly regulated from state and federal sources. So it's kind of speaking to the long extension arm of the state infrastructure to affect the availability of those services. How much of that exists per kind of 1,000 Californians in a particular cut. But what is in the composite of those programs, we are certainly open to that. And because part of it is thinking about, so how do you include IHSS, given that IHSS is really about people having access to it by virtue of their functional need, and then they could have a friend caregiver, they can have all sorts of caregivers, and it's not a physical location like an adult day center. So we're struggling with how to kind of make that come to life, but that's the intent, and we're working, Terry is pushing us hard, and I'm smiling when I'm saying that, Terry, for you on the phone, of like, how do you construct this measure so that it's meaningful? So we're doing a lot of digging, but really open to your thoughts on this. We probably don't have time for all of that today, but just know that we welcome that, and writing, you can email any of us. You can email Carrie if you have thoughts on how do we construct that availability framework.
Let's go to Jeff.
First, I want to associate myself with Karen's comment about what unmet need is and isn't. For example, if you are providing training on using an iPhone to someone with vision loss, if you give them 3 hours of training for one person, that might be enough to have them, totally trained, and for other people, it might take them 15 hours. So you have to really look behind not just the, modes and hours of service, but what exactly is achieved. But I have a question, and you've addressed it a little bit, but maybe you can amplify. Will your report and what you produce identify sort of the gaps and the problems that state and other entities face in terms of engaging in these data gathering efforts, whether it be physical issues or infrastructure or whatever, so that when they decide to hopefully upgrade these data gathering efforts in the future, they'll know what problems they need to handle?
We are definitely open to your considerations on those topics. I would say that we definitely are not expert on all of the elements for those considerations, so we welcome your feedback in that particular area. Our data gap report definitely is to speak to what doesn't exist that we think should exist, and what are the mechanisms, potentialities for gathering that information. So additional considerations to be added to that discussion, we welcome.
All right, we have Catherine, Nina, and then Ellen. And then we're going to move on to the caregiver side.
First of all, I think this is really interesting and like really the right approach. So my questions are, and I think some of them may have been answered, but in some systems there is how much was authorized versus how much was utilized, and I think the discrepancy between those actually tells you something about the availability of services and other barriers. So I think there's probably a way to do that within the IHSS system, and I know there's a way to do that within the developmental disabilities system, because that data is actually already tracked by purchase of service expenditures based on ethnicity. There's a lot of really robust data in the DD system about that. Then the second is, you have the list there, and I guess it's just to think when you're comparing kind of what we listed as services, are there other disability-specific services that should or shouldn't be folded within that, and what would that look like, and how best to get the data, because they're probably not necessarily groups that use the same survey, although there's other survey tools. And then the last, and maybe this is going to, because we're only on Dashboard Measure 1.0, I think there's a equally interesting question about not just the direct services that people get, but sort of the availability statewide geographically about information and referral and all of those kinds of services. That would be, if it's not being done separately, then maybe it'd be an interesting overlay, I think, in some ways, in terms of what the direct services are.
Really thoughtful comments. Thank you. I think the spirit of where we were planning to go with our recommendation of Dashboard 1.0 measures was definitely at the macro level, not program-specific measures, although I really like what you've articulated about that differential between authorized and, you didn't use received, but
in a macro way, you could do that.
You totally could do that, absolutely. And what I would love in many ways is that the work that the Master Plan for Aging puts forth in terms of the conceptual frame of Dashboard 1.0, that there are person-level measures and system driver measures, that could be a template that any agency, any department could make their own dashboard or any program could make their own dashboard that would be specific to their information systems, that would start to array data in a way that speaks about person-level impacts and the system capacity availability underneath to drive that forward. It would radically change, I think, the way in which state-level information is put out to be much more about the person at the center and how the system is supportive of that. And that could be something that could be a recommendation that anyone could put forward as part of Master Plan for Aging, that we move forward to that larger information display on all the programs that serve the populations we care about.
Nina.
So, Nina Weiler, Harwell, AARP. So I actually really like this. I don't know if Stacy's already commented, Stacy Moore, my colleague, but what I like about it is it's, at least at the beginning, pretty easy to understand, because we're looking at, I thought of this as problem solution. So here's our problem, and we have data on, say, on the unmet needs. And then you kind of have your solution on a very broad level, but what's going to go in between there, I guess, is my question. Like, what are the interventions from each program that are going to really attune to that unmet need, right? I mean, just think very personally, when my mother went into her decline, and she had some of the unmet needs that were on there, boy, it just led to further declines. And because there weren't the appropriate, and this was a different state, but because there weren't nobody was really checking that, like, oh, because she's taking this medicine and she had toileting needs, quite frankly, that weren't being met, that led to further depression and early death. So at least being able to kind of, again, match what is that unmet need, services, but also the appropriate interventions in between. I mean, we've been talking quite a bit about upstream, and just having that data on the unmet needs is kind of the upstream. Oh, last week this person didn't have enough food, and we know all the problems that come from malnourishment and food insecurity. So anyway, but I'd like to hear more about what we're thinking about in terms of the precise evidence-based interventions. Have we gotten there?
So no, we haven't gotten there, and I don't estimate that we'll get there on Dashboard 1.0. I think that in many ways it's about the community of service providers and innovators and leaders and policymakers to say, how do we want to move the needle on addressing unmet need and the adverse consequences associated with unmet need, because it could come from lots of different angles. And there's also, I think, a way that each program, each service line, whether it be state funded or not, could make their own contribution statement about how they're addressing unmet need through the work that they do. So it's more about, here is where we are as a state, and then it really calls the question to service providers of all types, what are you doing to address unmet need of California's population with LTSS difficulty? But I don't see that right now in the spirit of Dashboard 1.0. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, or you're good? Okay.
Great, thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this. I've been looking forward to hearing about the measures for a long time, so thank you. I'm guessing it isn't possible when you're looking at the individuals responding to the CHIS questions to know if they're receiving services. Are they receiving any of these services and they still have an unmet need? Is there any way to correlate, or is that question asked as part of CHIS? That's my first question. And then the second one is, what are your aspirational measures? I bet you have some dreams about what you would really like to see in 2.0.
Okay, that's a really, really long conversation, so we're going to table that, but Catherine's going to do a great job on answering your first question.
So in the follow-up LTSS survey, we do ask about whether people who are getting assistance, where they're getting it, what kind of, but it's not program name specific. It's really about whether people get personal care assistance, whether they go to a community center, whether they're getting food assistance, those sorts of things. So yes, we'll be able to crosswalk those with unmet need. We also ask about how services are paid, whether they're paid or unpaid, and how they're paid if they're paid.
We should probably hand it over to Kathy to talk about measures that are part of Objective 1.2. So Kathy, are you ready?
I was going to actually set this up.
Oh, good, even better.
So while she's waking up, Kathy, getting unmuted. So we're going to talk about needs and experiences, the measures that look at the needs and experiences of caregivers through Objective 1.2. And I'm going to talk about a couple more CHIS measures that we can use and that we're recommending, and then turn it over to Kathy, because I think what's really interesting in what she's going to present is looking at side-by-side sort of population-level measures and then programmatic measures. So she's going to provide the example of data that's being gathered at the Caregiver Resource Center, and we'll talk about how those we can crosswalk those two different sets of data as well. I think it provides an example for some of what we're talking about, like what's going on at the program level, then what's going on at the population level, and how can we use those two different measures to get the story, the complete story. So she's gonna be talking about caregiver profiles through the CRC, demographics, characteristics, and services. Very briefly, though, I will say that in the current 2019-2020 CHIS, we have a caregiver module. So this is a set of questions that is asked of, it starts with a caregiver, are you providing care question. Everybody in the 40,000 sample is asked that question. And if they say yes to that question, then they're asked a series of about 12 questions, which actually yields a pretty robust set of information. So what we're recommending on the next slide from the CHIS caregiver module is the ability to report on the prevalence of caregiving. We can generate those estimates of who's reporting that they provided care in the last 12 months, and then as well, those who are currently providing care. So those are sort of the two different timelines for which we can provide a composite measure of caregiving. And then following up to the next slide, we have a measure of caregiving consequences. Again, these are individual questions that relate to physical or mental health consequences, financial stress, and changes in employment. So walking through those 4 dimensions, we can create, once again, sort of that accessible composite measure of caregiver consequences. And as Gretchen pointed out, you can look at them individually, but it gives that big global number that will tell us something about caregivers and their experiences in California. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Kelly now. And you have a question before we do that. We've got Susan.
This is Susan DeMorris with the Alzheimer's Association. Will this question continue, or isn't this just a one-time, will we be able to measure this same question going forward, or is it a moment in time?
Thank you. That's a very important distinction. At this time, it is a moment in time. It's from the current cycle, 2019-2020. Speaking of aspirational, we would definitely like this to be something that can be measured and repeat, just as the LTSS survey is going to be repeated in 2023, 2024, for example. It would be ideal to be able to repeat the caregiver measures in 2023, 2024.
I just have a question. I know there's a paid family leave module coming. Are you thinking about how that'll get incorporated going forward? Do you want to take that later? I'll leave it to you.
Sure. There is, just to clarify, there's not a module, but there is interest in this paid family leave caregiver question. And so we are convening a work group for the CHIS that is looking at that with a group of experts. Some of them are happily in this room on the phone, and to look at that. But there's interest in that. It is a policy relevant issue, current, and so we'll see where that goes. But I think the point of this is the initial stages, just to see what should be measured, how should it be measured, and then hopefully that would be integrated into the CHIS in an ideal world. I don't know if that answers you, but.
Not 1.0.
I'm on a group, so thank you.
All right, Kathy Kelly, are you unmuted? Kathy? Is she? Is she chatting? Kathy, we can't quite hear you. We heard you earlier.
Hi, this is Donna.
Oh, hi, Donna.
Hi. I could start on her section till she gets on.
Okay, that'd be great. Kathy,
okay.
We have not given up on you.
Right, Kathy, check if she's on the phone and she's on her laptop. Her phone may be muted, even though the board may say unmuted on the internet. So just a suggestion. Okay, go ahead to the next slide. All right, so in looking at what's being done in the California Caregiver Resource Centers, of which there are 11, and the centers have begun to start a system-wide data collection process that will use a database across all 11 CRCs that cover the state of California. So these, of course, will be data for people that enter into the Caregiver Resource Center system as clients. But what this, in our discussions, what this allows is a more in-depth look at who are caregivers that are at least reaching out and or have been reached out to and are beginning to use programs in California. So we're looking at a lot of person-centered core measures, but which would help refine that profile of people so that we can look at age and the relationship to who they're caring for, down to the zip code level. We also are looking at education level, language, sexual orientation, gender identity, and employment, both changes in employment and current employment status. The other piece from the database, and we're hoping that this, because we have this, the funding is beginning now till 2023, and then hopefully the database will continue on with other, hopefully, continued funding for the program. This would, again, be the beginning of some person-centered core measures and for the program. You can go to the next slide. I'm hoping Kathy gets on soon so she can. The next thing we really want to look at from Objective 1.2 is that we want to understand what are the challenges and rewards. One of the things we do want to be able to say about caregivers is the positive side of caregiving. A lot of research and a lot of ways that we tend to look at some of our issues might be on the negative side, but we do want to also say what is positive about the caregiving experience. So when we, within our measures that we have for the database, besides the usual ADLs, IADLs, and difficulties, number of hours, we also have the emotional and health measures that can talk about how people are feeling in terms of loneliness, depression, stress. And from the caregiver standpoint, we are actually finding out, does the caregiver have durable power of attorneys, pulse, health directives, wills? Other questions that look at the caregiver wellness on the positive side, as we can see if the caregiver is feeling more confident with their caregiving based on interventions that are received or information or connection through social support by attending support groups or being able to go to education events, for example. And so again, a lot of these, one of the things we wanted to make sure is that the data that's in the CRC database will also link up with what's in the CHIS, which we were talking about earlier, CHIS database. So some of these questions do go forward. Now it looks like Kathy says she's on her laptop. So maybe you could unmute her and see if she can get on.
Kathy is unmuted.
Yes, she is. Okay, so I don't know what else to say.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Thank you, Kathy. I was trying to fill in, but I never do as well as you do. So go ahead.
I've been sitting here for hours. Anyway, where are we? I'm sorry.
I've only messed up one of your slides, so go ahead.
Oh. Okay, so I know that Donna talked about where these, where this data comes from, and I just want to, before I go in and talk about all of the components of the data that we are now collecting, or we're in the process of bringing people on board with a client record system that will enable us to have this data more readily available for use in a variety of ways. Is that when, from my perspective of looking at how the data that's available for caregiver purposes of describing or talking about caregiver outcomes is pretty rare. sitting along with Gretchen on the LTSS scorecard that AARP does. I'll talk a bit about the composite scores a little bit later, but the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of descriptive studies around caregivers, but there's not a lot of in-depth detail about how caregivers are faring, particularly within a state system. It just doesn't happen. We have this rare opportunity with the information that's from the CHIS survey, which is a huge population sample. And now with the expansion of the CRC system using a uniform assessment, so CHIS has about 20,000 on the questionnaire, and also has 40,000 on some of the questions that are integrated into the CHIS standard survey, that will be able to participate with data that's coming across the state, a fairly diverse sample of caregivers, which will be 8,000 plus on an annual basis. So what we have is this really golden opportunity to say, how do we use this data effectively to really describe what families are doing within the long-term care system. I regret, have a problem talking about workforce because they're not paid, but be that as it may, these components here will start to set the bar for description and attention paid to the contributions of caregivers. And as we move through, we're going to know that this is a 1.0 experiment, and it's going to be an iterative process, and we'll start to refine and understand more as we move along. But just say it's a very unique opportunity that is not available in any other state that I'm aware of at the moment. So in the core measures, when we talk about the types of services, I think, Donna, can you go back for just a moment to the, I just want to make a point. I know Donna went through this, but there's many collections of ADLs and IADLs that are out there, and we certainly collect that too. But what is not collected uniformly, and scant attention has been paid until there's been 2 panel surveys done on the amount of medical tasks, is that we do ask these kinds of questions. So it gives an idea of the complexity of tasks that are being provided by family caregivers who, by and large, are not touched by many formal services in the community. So I just wanted to make mention of that, and also the other kinds of things, other measures that we're using on the health and emotional health impact, the depression, the PHQ-9, and the loneliness scale, which is UCLA, which we have moved from looking at social isolation and using this particular scale because it's going to be in broader use across the Administration for Community Living Programs and so on. That these are all factors that we look at in terms of definitely the impact on health in conjunction with caregiving. Just because you are caring for somebody doesn't necessarily mean you're not socially isolated and lonely. And in our scores before, we noted that over 50% of our caregivers noted social isolation in their caregiving activities. And we know that that's a really troublesome health impact can result from that type of score. So can we just move ahead again? Sorry, thank you. In the service usage, because we have an individualized client record, we can tie the demographics and characteristics that Donna talked about a little bit earlier, and also look at what are the individual service usage for those clients, what are the package of services that families most likely use. These are just units of service. Intake is, that initial call, but we do ask a lot of risk assessment questions on that call, and we're able to tailor the kinds of response and consumer information that goes along with that. The caregiver assessment I talked about before. Those are the benchmark questions that we're asking about further demographics and all of the impacts and other information that we need to do an adequate caregiver care plan or action plan. Consultation is our encounters with families. I want to say that we know that we have X number of new families that come in to CRC, but we also know that 30–40% of additional calls are coming from families who are in prior fiscal years. So this is a long-term engagement, a long-term relationship that's built up over time, which is also a unique feature in terms of families go in and out depending upon if they're experiencing a crisis. Counseling is short-term counseling with a therapist. Next slide. We do a lot of the evidence-based skill building, problem solving, powerful tools, savvy caregiver, psychoeducational groups, consultation, legal, financial, general education programs on a broad spectrum, oftentimes on direct care skills, which are generally not taught to caregivers, including medical task skills. And then we have respite vouchers and so on. So that's kind of the composite of the services, so we know how much is used. On an aggregate level, we know how much is used by how many clients. On the individualized level, we can look at what are the range of services that are used by cutting by maybe different characteristics of clients, how much is being used in rural areas versus urban, and different diverse groups and so on. Next slide. So this is the crosswalk. Catherine, do you want to talk about the crosswalk? We just wanted to see how much congruence was there between the CHIS data and the CRC data. And we actually were really surprised. But Catherine, you want to walk through?
Sure. This was Kathy's brainchild to say, let's see where these overlap. And now, not each question is asked exactly the same way, but both CHIS and the CRC data look at demographics, collect information on different characteristics, relationship to the care recipient, the number of hours spent caregiving per week, specifically the same question in CHIS and in the CRC data. The ADLs and IADLs, in the CHIS, we ask about those that are needed by the care recipient. So in the LTSS survey, what the needs are in ADLs and IDLs, but in the CRC, it's what's performed by the caregiver. We don't ask questions about the medical tasks performed in CHIS. We don't have that level of granularity. So I think the overall message here is that these two complementary data sources really provide a unique opportunity to sort of look at a benchmark of population level data that's looking at caregivers across the state of California who may or may not be connected to programs. And then we have programmatic data, people who are connected to a certain level of service, and we can look at those and compare them. You cannot really integrate these data. That would not be where we would go with this, but you can develop a profile. So I think this is a great example of other ways we can start to do that. I won't call it harmonization of data, because that's a very different type of thing where you're actually creating and integrating measures that are comparable, but we can look at and develop a composite, or I should avoid that word, a profile. Let's get our language together. A profile of caregiver experience, both at the population level and then in this specific caregiver sample. And I imagine we can do this with other programmatic data vis-a-vis, looking at CHIS and program data for LTSS. And again, the measures are across the board. We have information about living arrangement, health, mental health impact of caregiving. CHIS doesn't have the legal and health documents. I think that's a really valuable set of questions that CRC asks to get at, advanced health directives, et cetera. Very unusual to get that kind of data. Health insurance coverage we have in both data sets. And then public programs at CHIS. In the general CHIS, we ask a host of other questions about, are people getting food assistance? Are they getting general assistance, other kinds of social welfare program support? So, and I should say that that's not an exhaustive list. either what's in CHIS or what's in CRC data, but this is just an example.
So just a time check, I just want to make sure that in about 10 or so minutes that we get into the referred recommendations from the LTSS committee to the research committee. So just wanted to.
Okay.
Okay.
The next slide. Oh, okay. So these are composite scores that come from the state AARP state LTSS scorecard. And there's, as Gretchen mentioned, the next scorecard comes out in June, but there's 4 areas which have multiple services underneath them, and they are weighted in a way that comes up as a composite score. So there's a section on supporting working family caregivers, person and family-centered care, excuse me, nurse delegation, scope of practice, and transportation policies. Can you, next slide? So the supporting working caregivers has the information around family medical leave. California always scores, you know, higher, has more points allotted because we have paid family leave and have for about 12 years. And then the paid, mandatory paid family leave and sick days, excuse me, family medical leave. And then the second one is paid family leave, which is germane to California particularly, and paid sick days. So you can see underneath here, there are a variety of things that are rated on a scale and then come up as a whole composite for just this element, just this category of supporting working family caregivers. This is has been repeated every 3 years. I don't even want to ask Gretchen if there another 3 years. I'm assuming there's going to be you know, another LTSS scorecard. This has been, the scorecard in general have been very helpful to many states to use in improving their LTSS profile. And states do really pay attention to the results in the scorecard because everyone is ranked according to different elements within the scorecard and then the overall ranking as well. The next slide for composite.
Now, I'll just say while the slide's changing that when Kathy's talking about the scale is how well does California do relative to how well other states are doing. So California only has one number, and then that is juxtaposed against how well Idaho did on that and Connecticut did on that. So, but the scale is like on some of these, you know, do we have unemployment insurance or not? You know, we have a score for that, and sometimes there's variation for it to change, and sometimes there's not a huge variation if it's just 0 or 1.
So these are just the other mention is that these are just the presence of these policies in the state. So for example, unemployment insurance, there is unemployment insurance that address good cause for job loss due to a disability of a member of someone's immediate family. I don't know whether anyone actually A, knows that, or B, takes that, but it's the presence of having the policy in place that has the bearing on the requisite composite score. The last one in this is the state policies that affect discrimination, something that's being talked about right now in the legislature. Next one. Next slide. This is on person family-centered care. This is financial protection for spouses, the spousal impoverishment protection. State assessment of family caregiver needs. This is whether there's a uniform assessment, basically, you know, across programs. The CARE Act was put in there when it was passed, and it's in 42 states now, and the District of Columbia. Next slide. This is on nurse delegation scope of practice. I noticed that you had something in the recommendations on this. So what number of health maintenance tasks would be able to be delegated to LTSS workers? That's, you know, not an issue in IHSS, but it is on the private side. And nurse practitioner scope of practice. The next slide. Transportation policies were molded under that. It's interesting. We do have someone representing transportation services, so we're going to talk a little bit about how this is, you know, whether this stays here or maybe stays here, and then there's addition to transportation considerations. This concerns obviously volunteer driver policies, whether there are coordinating councils, because that really makes an impact on, you know, how well transportation services are reviewed and improved, and Medicaid non-medical transportation. So these are the four areas that represent the composite scores individually and then collectively in the scorecard. Next slide. Okay.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do we want to take or Donna, do you have a few concluding?
Yeah, if you would just go to the recommendation slide. Yeah, great. One more. There we go.
I thought that was moving into the...
Remember, hi, this is Donna Benton. Remembering that our goal for research right now is it's 1.0, as you've heard, and sometimes they always say repeat something 3 times to get it through. So this is your 3rd time hearing that one. And we are really trying to, we know that there are more things that will be coming on and for LTSS, but we want to have something that can be up for the dashboard as soon as we can for this first beginning phase. So we really would like to see funding, because if we don't continue to fund LTSS data collection, we won't have it and we won't be able to measure how well we're doing with our goals. So this has to be something that's considered a priority in terms of funding for integration and dissemination of the information. We have to look at a minimum data set for our home and community-based programs, so that we have a consistency of data across the state that can be looked at. We'd like to see standardization and harmonization, which is not the same as standardization. It's how you bring together the information across different service delivery sections, so that whenever possible, this can push down through all levels of government and include other community programs, data sets that we can add on to, where, for example, like the CRC data set that was discussed as an example today. And then assessment, really having a standardized way of assessing a consumer's needs and their experience. We know that people, we can talk about needs, but if we don't know how the person is experiencing things, we won't get a very good way of measuring how we're impacting even along diversity issues, because we could say, well, it's available in your neighborhood, but if someone calls and doesn't feel that the person answering or that the service is meeting their need within their culture, then that's not going to be a good experience for that person. And so we want to look at those outcome metrics that really look at the quality and embody that whole principle of the person, and what we'd like to also include family-centered care in these measures. So that's my wrap up. I know now we have time for questions, and thank you guys for listening to us.
Yeah,
Thank
you.
you.
Just take about 5 minutes for questions, because we do really want to move into what the LTSS committee is referring to, research. But Susan, good, and then Catherine.
I think this is a dumb question. So in terms of data,
no dumb questions.
In terms of data around hospital utilization, ER visits, and things like that, it would show up under Goal 3.
Goal 3, correct.
Yes.
And you're welcome to come to that meeting in La Jolla on March 19th. There's a lunch ahead of time.
We appreciate the interplay between health measures and LTSS measures, so we are cognizant of that, but we really decided to just kind of cleave responsibilities at this point in time. But we do see that the dashboard for MP4A, right, could connect those and make composites relative to LTSS difficulty and rehospitalization. I mean, you can do a lot of things by putting pieces together.
Nina? And one could go up and the other could go down, hopefully. So the nursing homes would be included in this? I didn't see nursing homes reflected.
We would think about that as part of that system driver composite measure under Objective 1.1 in terms of the service landscape of availability. I think we probably had it, we didn't state it explicitly, but there was definitely a group preference for the home and community-based service availability side, but the truth is that nursing facilities do provide support to individuals, so we'd have to decide where does it live and how do you represent that as part of the larger continuum of care.
Great, to support our premise that if we invest in home and community-based services, we'll see a corresponding decrease, perhaps, in those other areas.
Or differential use towards rehab stays.
Yeah.
Nina?
There will always be a need for long-term care and for nursing homes because not everything can be done in the home by family and community services.
So, Nina Weiler, Harwell, ARP, just noticing bullet number 1, I know in our very long LTSS financing recommendation included the request that the CHIS LTSS questions be continually funded. It was in there somewhere, right? But yeah, the CADA. That's California Aging and Disability Alliance. So definitely support this, figuring out how we continue. I know these data sets are not cheap to fund. But however we figure this out so that it's continuous and we have good data, like the caregiver data is not just like every few years somebody like Archstone is generous and kicks in however $1 million it is. Can you talk to me a bit about not being like a quantitative researcher myself? What would a minimum data set for HCBS LTSS look like? What does that mean?
One exists for the skilled nursing facilities that we're talking about. So it's really looking at sort of streamlining down to a few core measures that would be systematically, routinely collected across all these things that are currently siloed. So by doing that, that's really moving towards the ability to harmonize data, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like what we're doing with the 1.0 right now in a way. And I don't know if that's a good comparison, but we're trying to get down to what are the essential measures that can give us information across systems? And by having a minimum data set, and getting there is easier than what I just described. But it would be an aspirational goal.
Okay. With that, we're going to move into a few recommendations that we would call referred recommendations that LTSS came up with in their report that they wanted to make the research subcommittee aware of. And I'm going to read from my computer because I can't see that far. So I'm just going to read about 6 different recommendations that LTSS wanted to present to a research so they'd be aware of them. So first, how many older adults and people with disabilities are on Medi-Cal, are duals, are just above full Medi-Cal eligibility, including share of cost individuals? So I think this one, you know, the dashboard is going to have, when we talk about system drivers and core person-centered measures, but there's also another way to split that up, which is let's describe our population, descriptive measures. There will be a whole part of the dashboard that describes people in California. And some of the measures you saw today, like how many people have difficulty with personal care, those would probably be in the descriptive part. So I think that's...
Yeah, if I can just add on to that, I think there's a lot that we
as a large kind of community of people interested in the profiles of older people, of aging Californians broadly. How do we define them in a variety of ways? And these are really relevant pieces of information that probably aren't captured in a simple way anywhere on a dashboard. And so, but we could also incorporate some things probably related to their health side. So I like this sense that of this intersection between age, access to care delivery, in terms of insurance coverage, which could probably be expanded in all sorts of different ways, as well as the Medi-Cal eligibility frame within that and what does that mean for maybe people who are just above Medi-Cal eligibility, another consideration that I think is spoken about a fair amount. So we'll bring these to the Health Goal 3 Committee too for the consideration.
Just in time for our March meeting. Another one is interesting. Develop a common data baseline of data elements across LTSS programs that can be shared securely and quickly among LTSS partners. An example is the Whole Person Care Project, and Health Homes under DHCS Managed Care includes development of a community health record. Could we build something like this for LTSS that eventually can interface with managed care organizations' databases?
So I think this it's a really interesting kind of program implementation information database. I would say that it's not necessarily the charge of the research subcommittee to have this incorporated in from our side, but in terms of could it be a recommendation that could come forth for Master Plan for Aging as a whole? Absolutely. To think about how you use information to intersect with care delivery. But our charge is definitely about the data dashboard itself, more of that profile and measurement for change.
Yeah. Wrong way. The next one is mapping of demographics and services as they exist today using the latest technology, like interactive geomap version of the county data book that Lydia presented at our meeting that includes scraping technology, state and local databases, zip code level data. Census offers an opportunity to see where needs are, and this can be used to monitor infrastructure development and also success of access standards as they are designed. So this is something else that, we can bring 2.0 and in recommendations through the master plan, recommendations for how we collect data.
If I could just comment a bit on this one too. I think it probably is 2.0 in terms of actually making this come to life, but the spirit of that system driver measure about where service availability is relative to Californians who are aging by different age groupings, that's the spirit that's undergirding that. And could you do it through geomapping? Could you connect? Ultimately, it would be census data that would be ported in terms of people living in certain areas in certain age bands. So this is really, I think, the next level iteration about how do you show where services are relative to where various need is, even just by the simplest cut of saying, you can say if you're over 85, the likelihood is that a certain portion of that group is going to have needs, and our services distribute in that particular way. Can't say that for younger groups, but you can say it a little bit more for age 85 and above.
What research exists to support recommendation savings taxpayer dollars? So I think this is a recommendation saying, can we do more research or mine existing research on the fact that a lot of the LTSS recommendations are designed to save, in the end, in the long term, save taxpayer dollars.
Sounds like this is program evaluation at some level, which I think is also very useful, and I would encourage any of the LTSS recommendations that where it's appropriate to have an evaluation component to it if it's part of your funding ask.
The fifth one is, what is the projected need for direct care workforce workers by 2030? And I believe that's data that Heather Young likely has, or we had a very nice presentation on that in one of the LTSS meetings where the CWDA came. Yeah. Right, that Heather was part of. Right.
So we recognize that we didn't have in our immediate brain set about a system driver measure about the care delivery workforce. And so we welcome any recommendation that this group has about what would be a discrete system driver measure and where would it come from? Like you're sharing, Department of Labor may have it. Wonderful. We would love to just know what's the data source and what's the question, so we can figure out a way to port that in.
Mm-hmm.
There's national figures, but if there's California specific, that would be really valuable.
And regional, yeah.
And regional, sure.
And what research exists about the impact of restricted immigration on the workforce?
That's a good question. I know of studies from other countries. I don't know of any in particular, but I think the spirit of the dashboard would probably be more about the availability of the direct care workforce, but the implication of any policy on that would probably be something outside of the scope of the measurement dashboard at this point, but could be incorporated into policy discussions or recommendations about better understanding this relative to California's needs, if that was a recommendation somebody wanted to put forward.
May want to consult with Fernando Torres-Gil about that last question, too. There's a lot about that.
Mm-hmm. Catherine?
I just have one comment as I'm listening to this, and we were talking about the descriptive data. And I will say that it connects actually something to, I think Nina said way earlier in maybe another meeting, of we don't want the only descriptors to be how needy and people are, because it then goes to if you paint a picture that says people with disabilities, older adults need all these things and they have all these really healthcare issues, it is going to make it harder to show that you in the end could save money because people continue to work and they generate taxes or whatever. So I just really want to place a pin by that descriptive data has to be balanced in that way, or we're going to cause ourselves down the road problems.
May I just speak? I know we have to move on, but thank you for bringing that up, because that's a really important picture to paint, that even when somebody may be drawing services, they're working, they're caregiving, they're volunteering, they're contributing to charity and so forth. And I know ARP, we've done our research on showing how the contributions of 50 plus Californians, and I think Stacy's brought that up during research subcommittee. But yeah, well, let's not lose that too.
So thank you so much for bringing that forward, both of you, in your harmonized way. Stacey brought up some really great stuff that we are looking for as kind of addressing the goal 2, livable communities element, so that you wouldn't see that here particularly. But I think what's really important is that we, as the committee, are offering a proposed set of measures to get a picture of goal 1, and what we would love for each organization to do, or maybe the LTSS committee wants to do, is relative to some of the things that we propose. We definitely, there's gaps that we talked about, say, like the workforce measure. But if you had your favorite 4 measures out of all of this, what might you put forward, knowing also that we'll have goal 3 measures, which I'm hoping in goal 3 measures is something like self-rated health. Because it's in CHIS, and it does show that there are 90-year-olds who express excellent health, or people with disabilities that are experiencing their life today as excellent health because their needs are getting met, or a richer picture of the California composite of aging Californians. So, but we welcome your perspective on what measures do you like out of, and not that ours that we put forth are the only ones, but the ones that we can collect today and show today. So, because I think the story really matters about what the data dashboard tells about our aging California.
That's a great point. That's a great point. So I don't see any other flags up, and I don't see any names online. So why don't we move, before we move to public comment, I just want to, now Catherine's on the room, but thank our research committee's visitors, who are as hardworking a group as the LTSS. We have some amazing subcommittees in this master plan, so thank you for being here. They will be going to Equity Work Group and SAC, and we'll be rolling out more will be revealed. More is coming, so.
I think they're posted online, or they will be posted online. So they are posted. Thank you, CDA team.
And there is no deadline for comment. You don't have to comment in the next 48 hours.
That's right.
You could take a week even.
But it also could become, I think you were asking at the very beginning, like, are there things LTSS would want to do after we take maybe a moment to pause when we get this done, and having some additional discussion about what's the picture we want to paint, what are the indicators where I think that would be a rich discussion for a subsequent meeting after our pause.
Our spring break, yeah.
And I think we'd really welcome all of that expertise. I think particularly on the whole smattering of measures that will come out too, to kind of fill in the pieces. So, yeah.
I would just add to that too, because I'm glad you mentioned the part about the paid direct care workforce, because a lot of the people that would have a really important perspectives on that who are on the committee aren't able to be on right now. So I think that's something we could revisit at a future meeting. Great role for this committee.
Good. All right, so we're going to start with public comment in the room, and also that everybody who is on Zoom should know that there's a link to submit public comment and meeting feedback, as well as another link on the slide to submit detailed recommendations for the MPA. So anybody in the room have comment? No public comment in the room? All right, do we have anybody online? We have one person? What's her name?
Carmen Brammer.
Carmen Brammer? You are unmuted. Carmen, do you have a...
There we go.
We can hear you.
Yeah.
There we go.
So thanks everyone for all this information. It's wonderful stuff. I'm super excited about it. And I can tell you who I am. I'm Carmen Brammer. I'm a member of the public. I'm also a caregiver for my mother, and I'm also a commissioner on the Santa Clara County Senior Care Commission. But I'm attending this as caregiver for my mom. What I'd like to share is looking at the current LTSS report, where you've got at the beginning, you've got the bullets that the objectives that you've pulled out. I'm thinking there's a way that we could probably structure that so that it comes out much more powerfully. Because right now we've got about 40-something pages, and I'd love to see that stuff just come out in a way that it really pops and really grabs folks' attention. And I'm happy to help format that. It doesn't require a lot of changes, just some ways to position it a little.
Carmen, are you, did the call drop?
Research committee.
Okay. Oh, we hear you again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. The other thing I want to talk about, to ask the question of the research committee is, do they have data on what the costs are if we don't implement? Are you looking into that?
Thank you so much for that question. This is Gretchen Alkema. Given the complexity of the intersection of the recommendations from this committee and knowing that they're going to roll up, we do not at this time have any data source that would provide that kind of, I think of a congressional budget office estimate, but I think offering up a recommendation through public comment of that kind of evaluation to be done, that if these changes aren't pushed forward, what might be the implications of that, fiscal implications, human implications. I think that's a really valuable piece of public comment that I really hope that you provide to the Master Plan for Aging team.
So it sounds like it's something we would want to incorporate, correct?
I think that it's a really valuable contribution to the process. We as the research subcommittee don't have any knowledge of any data resource that we could generate that for the dashboard, but it sounds like a really valuable contribution to the processes that be requested.
Gotcha.
Great, thank you. Our next commenter is Bill Sive, S-I-V-E. You should be unmuted, Bill.
Bill Sive. Can you hear me?
Sive, sorry.
Yes, thank you so much. Just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for wrapping this up in the way you're doing. I submitted 3 comment questions in the chat box. Hopefully you can see them. One of them on intellectual humility. Definitely a new category for myself personally. And then one on climate change is related to CHS and CRC questionnaire. Don't see a lot of that being addressed, actually just in general, and how climate change affects health. And lastly, I put in a comment for the LTSS committee. One thing that I participated in many of these, but nobody has actually directly spoken about death and dying. And I think we're kind of missing the boat there. So just consider it moving forward, that's all. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. That is definitely something that we need to be talking about more, so we really appreciate that comment. I think that would be in the Goal 3 area, health and well-being. Sarah?
Yeah, thank you, Bill. This is Sarah Steenhausen. It is something that has certainly come up, and it's one of these issues that we see such strong connection across the different issues and goal areas. And while we recognize you can't really separate out that discussion when you think about a person's long-term services and supports needs, for purposes of the scope of the issues that were addressed in this LTSS committee, it was determined that that issue of death and dying and the related issues were best addressed in the health and well-being goal group. So that's something that we are hopeful. They're meeting Thursday, and that they will be including in their range of issues and recommendations.
All right, so I believe that that concludes our public comment. We do want to say, just in terms of next steps, one of the things that we are going to be doing when we get back to the office or tomorrow morning is putting together a really concrete, this timeline that we've worked out of what happens on what day in 48 hours and where the report goes, and get back to you on some of those questions you had about how this actually gets transmitted to the governor. That's a good question. And then the other thing that we'll be following, the party. Yeah, he's going to, the party at Sarah's house, he's invited. Yeah, I agree, Ellen. And then the last thing that we need to come to some agreement on that we didn't do today, but I think we came to agreement that we wanted a spring break, but then that there's also value in continuing to meet. And we will continue to talk as a group about timing for that and how to best time that with all the other timelines of the other committees that are happening right now as well. All right, thanks. That concludes the meeting.
Thanks, everybody on the phone.
Thanks, everybody in the room.
Yay! That is like the biggest. Maybe it's intended to be that way. I'm a warrior by training.